Jesse Stewart,
Nathan,
thanks for coming in.
glad to be here.
You're an interesting guy.
I appreciate that.
So you're currently getting your PhD.
Yes.
You've written 2 books. One hasn't come out yet. You were a Ranger, Army Ranger.
Retired.
Yep. So it's not like Marines, once a Marine, always a Marine. It's not like once a Ranger, always a Ranger.
It depends on the day who I'm talking to. I don't know, it offends some people.
Yeah, I had a friend in the Marines who
the Marines are definitely, to give my respect to my Marine brothers and sisters, they're very hard on the once a Marine, always a Marine. I can tell you this, that people ask me why do you stay in shape? And most of the time when people, I remember the first time I went to go speak at USC and snowboard, I think they had built a wheelchair ramp for me because they looked up, because my total disability rating adds up to, I think, 340%. And so when you look at my background, it's like, you think this would be a crippled guy in a wheelchair coming up. But people ask you, why do you stay in shape? And I'm like, in case I got to go back. So, if I had to do it all over again, I would 100%.
I remember thinking, I was riding my bike this morning, my road bike, and I was like, I bet this guy I'm having on today probably rides 100 miles a day and runs a marathon. I just look at you as a David Goggins. I read your little short bio that you said. I was like, this is probably a David Goggins type guy.
I do my best to stay fit. I should not be alive. And that's honestly probably the biggest thing that drives, staying fit is just being grateful that I have the health that I have through the things that I went through. I wasn't retired in the way that most people do, which is do 20 years. I was retired after being wounded 4 times and 4 pretty significant surgeries. And after the last one, they decided to medically retire me at 31. And so, I should not be able to do a lot of the things that I do physically. And so I try not to take it for granted. I wouldn't say I'm at David's, level or anything. I actually don't run anymore. I am an active campaigner against running personally, but that's just because I've had my knee reconstructed 5 times on the left side. So I had a piece of shrapnel go through it from a suicide bomber March 17th of 2007. So my running days are over, but big into the functional fitness stuff. I have started doing the Peloton. Not a big bike rider or anything like that. I think my legs are too white for that, but Peloton, I've been starting to get in a little bit more, but for me, it's more about the functional fitness type stuff.
Which is?
So I do the Jim Jones programming. Lisa Bouchard out there in Salt Lake City, her and her ex-husband started up Jim Jones in the early 2000s, and they came and helped revamp the Ranger Regiment physical fitness program back in 2005, 2006, which was the same time when the 300 actors were training out there. And so we had no idea that that's who we were working out with. And so I don't know if you ever seen the movie The 300.
I've not.
Probably the most physically fit actors you'll ever see in your life, and none of them looked anywhere close to that when they started. And so I do the Jim Jones programming still. It's very similar to the CrossFit. It's just more kind of mission-focused type workouts. And, Lisa and I stay close. She's one of my mentors, for AM300, and gone through their certification programs. And, it's definitely more kind of focused, I think, towards the operator, whether that operator is an athlete, whether that operator is a businessman, whether that operator is a teacher or whatever. And so I've stayed with it. So a lot of lifting heavy stuff, fast, at high intensity. I love to say for short periods of time.
Do you like to work out in a warehouse? Is that your thing?
No, I work out at Brookhaven Country Club. Yeah, definitely ruined that. If I had my choice, so if you go to Jim Jones in Salt Lake City, they've only got one gym. They've not done the CrossFit thing of pushing their label out everywhere. So they only got one gym, and it's in Salt Lake City. And when you go to it, you literally feel like you're walking into a black and white film, like Sin City type thing. Cool. It's everything in there is black and white. It's all rustic. It's there's just steel and bars there to move around. And I got my butt kicked plenty of times there at that gym. So, but that's still the programming that I do this day. And it's worked for me. It's helped with injury prevention. A lot of stuff that I'm able to do is because I can keep myself from getting re-injured. So why go away from something that works?
So take me back to, I guess, high school. When did you decide I'm going to the military?
Well, so that probably would go back a little bit before high school. So my parents got divorced when I was 5. My dad was in the military. He was in the Navy. In fact, did 32 years in the Navy. Retired right after he pinned my Ranger tab on me. But when I was 5, we were down in Orlando, and the last thing I remember being in kindergarten that dates how old I am, 1986. I went to go do a field trip at the space shuttle launch out there in May of 1986. And that, of course, is when the Challenger blew up. And so my kindergarten field trip was watching the Challenger. And I still remember it to this day of everybody running around freaking out and not understanding why everyone was so crazy. My poor grandma, who was a chaperone of it, thinking I was this like stoic, crazy kid that wasn't affected by this. Because I remember them telling us, once they reach a certain level, it's like they're going to be in space, and where they had blown up, they had been. And so that happened. And then shortly after that, my parents told us they were getting a divorce, and we moved up to Washington State when I was 6. And did not see my dad for a few years after that. Never really understood until later in life what had gone down. And my mother ended up remarrying a very physically abusive man that taught me how to take a hit at about 10, 11 years old. He was a former college football player, so not a small guy. And for me, the whole—
He wasn't the kicker is what you're saying.
He was not the kicker. He was a fullback. And I would tell, when I remember going through Ranger School, 10, 12 years later, oftentimes, there was nothing at Ranger School was hard, because I would always go back to the fights that I would have with that guy. And so, that was kind of the thing where I started wanting to pursue it. Was about 11, 12 years old. And it was purely about being able to protect myself, protect my family and those that I loved. And so that was kind of the driving factor, maybe not the most healthy driving factor at the time. But in addition to that, my father did, of course, 32 years in the Navy. My grandfather before that served in the Rangers. He was a World War II, Korea, early Vietnam era guy. And then we actually have a relative that, if you come over to my place which is in Brookhaven, by the way, there's a hatchet that's on my one of my display cases. And if you ever seen the movie The Patriot with Mel Gibson, the one you should watch. So he was one of the original Rogers Rangers, his character was, and he's got this hatchet in there. And I've got that hatchet from one of my relatives that served in Rogers Rangers back in the French Indian War. So for me, the Ranger aspect was always kind of like a family lore history thing. And I just knew that they kicked butt. And I knew that my grandfather was like a combination of Clint Eastwood and John Wayne in one person in real life. And so that was what I kind of put my eyes on. And when I got to high school, I was, believe it or not, 100 pounds my freshman year of high school, literally half the size that I am today. And, football, I could go out there and, played strong safety, the little guy that comes out of nowhere. But wrestling was where I found, I could go and I could compete with people on my own level. And so my wrestling coach, he had served as a Ranger. And so he kind of had pushed towards that. And then once I got towards the end of high school, it was very clear that unless I wanted to go in the military, I wasn't going to have an opportunity at, any sort of education. And so, because no one was coming to pay for it. So I got accepted at West Point, was planning to go there for baseball. My biological mother got really sick, and so I ended up staying to go to the University of Washington, and they just switched it over to an ROTC scholarship. So I started there, and then at the end of my freshman year, I had the opportunity to go to West Point back, but I would have had to start over as a freshman. And my battalion commander, who had gone to West Point, knew that I would probably get kicked out because I wouldn't be able to keep my mouth shut with all my peers that were now a year ahead of me with having to start over. And so I ended up staying at the University of Washington. I did like the OCS, Officer Candidate School, in between my junior and senior year, which was 2001, and went and did about a month with the 82nd Airborne Division as kind of like an internship thing. And then my aunt and uncle, so I still haven't chosen to go the Ranger route yet. My senior year going into that was where I had to make that decision.
And you were getting a degree.
So I'd already got my degree in mechanical engineering, and then I was getting a second degree in international studies to hide the engineering degree, because the Army would have force branched me into engineers, which I did not want to do. I wanted to pursue the Ranger route, but I hadn't made the decision. So at the time, mechanical engineering, and then was getting a second degree in international studies with an emphasis on the Middle East, speaking Arabic. 9/11 had not happened yet. So while I was doing this, I'd love to tell you that I was clairvoyant and I had this just amazing ability to have foresight of where we'd be fighting wars. But it was, the decision was made off of watching a CNN or Fox News special about how bin Laden had been offered up to President Clinton by the Sudanese government in 1999. And he turned it down.
Yeah.
And I was like, well, that guy is probably a pretty bad dude. So if anything's going to happen, that's probably where it would happen. So I finished OCS, finished that time at the 82nd. And my aunt and uncle, who were actors out, Broadway actors out in New York, had brought me out to New York City for kind of a final, civilian vacation because I was the only person in the family going to the military. And so went out there in September 2001 and spent a week out there right before the start of my senior year.
You're the fourth person to be in New York City during 9/11.
No. So I was there during 9/11, okay. And I'll find the picture on my Instagram. So they bring me out there, and I'd always wanted to go up. I've been a few times with them before, but I'd always wanted to go up to eat at the restaurant on top of the World Trade Center. We had never gotten to do it. So on September 10th, we got to go up there and eat brunch. And I went up there at 21 years old, have the picture with them, and went back to University of Washington that afternoon, was in the gym the next morning and watched the same towers that I just had brunch on attacked. And at that point, I was like, oh, this guy's went after my family. And so that was what solidified for me going the Ranger route.
So check this. The guy I had on today is Thursday. Mm-hmm. The guy I had on Tuesday, or was it last week? Yeah, it was Monday. Okay, the guy I had on Monday, he was supposed to have breakfast there September 11th, and he overslept.
Yep. So that was what kind of drove, that was the ultimate nail in the coffin that determined that I was going to go that route, was that happened. And so like to get into that route, especially as an ROTC cadet, is not the easiest because they give all the first choices to West Point and then the ROTC cadets get the leftovers. Well, fortunately, some things had happened that gave me the ability to kind of influence that decision a little bit more. Had a malfunction as a cadet when I was there at the 82nd with my parachute. And so they, and I didn't tell anybody at the time, like that I had jumped an unauthorized rucksack that weighed 100 pounds. And so they helped me get back there. And so for me, that was the whole thing, was just like, all right, you know, who's not going to go? Because I remember there's like 100 kids in ROTC. They all wanted to go infantry. They all wanted to pursue the Ranger route. 9/11 happens. There's like 3 of us that actually wanted to do it after it, you know, once it became real. So the other thing that I had going for me was I spoke Arabic. Because after 9/11, right, the Taliban came after us. So all of a sudden, I'm like a #1 draft pick. And I'm sitting there like with my hands folded being like, does anyone realize they don't speak Arabic in Afghanistan? So like they're all telling me, they're like, Jesse, you're a cadet Stewart. You've got the insight and the foresight. Like, what do you want? And I'm like, I want to be infantry. I want to be a Ranger. Like, okay, we're going to get you there. Like no one knows they actually speak Farsi there. They don't, they didn't speak Arabic. So I went, you know, through the infantry officer basic course, did well there.
Is it similar?
No.
Okay.
I mean, they can read it because the Quran is in Arabic, but no one speaks it there. Like the language is useless in Afghanistan. And so, but while I was in the infantry officer basic course, which would have been June 2002 to November 2002, like Iraq was ramping up. And so then I started Ranger School in January 2003 and then finished in March and then went right on the first thing smoking over to Iraq once I graduated from Ranger School.
All right, so we hear about all the time about buds and being a Navy SEAL and how tough it is and Hell Week.
You're setting me up to say something that's going to get me in trouble. I can feel it.
I would never. No, I mean, we do. We hear all the time. Like we glorify Navy SEALs. We really do. And it seems like other branches of the military don't think as highly as the fat dude on the couch watching something on the History Channel. So what is the difference between Hell Week and what you go through in Ranger School?
All right, so I'm going to be very careful on explaining this because I have made a commitment towards, I will honestly say that up until probably about 2 years ago, I had 0 friends that were Navy SEALs. We're not known for playing nice together. And the real difference, so take the buds and the Ranger School aspect out of it. The mission, the SEALs mission is to, come in, through the sea, right? And, use water to conduct amphibious assaults, whether it be from submarines, halo, high altitude, low opening parachute jump, into the ocean and then swim up.
But like Armati in Jocko, there was no ocean, right?
Yeah, so that was a great point that I brought up to many of them. So let's just get, okay. So that's the SEALs mission. And then the Army Rangers mission is, to conduct an airfield seizure and kind of fight inward out, right? And so land more focused. So yes, that was brought up many times from 2003 until 2010 while I was either a platoon leader or a company commander. There are exactly 6.2 nautical miles of sea line here in the country of Iraq. And there, I think, are 0 in Afghanistan because it's landlocked. What's your purpose here? But that was all kind of like inter service rivalry type stuff. The big difference is, they're more focused on that aspect, the amphibious assault type stuff, where we're more focused on the land. And when Iraq and Afghanistan happened, it just kind of fell more into our wheelhouse initially. As far as the training goes, like the CQB, close quarter battle type stuff, the urban warfare, we both train a lot on. So the missions are similar. Our task force, we're plugged and played into different areas, but it probably comes down more to the culture is what, the difference is within. And, the difference.
Would you like to speak on that culture?
So let's look at just the movie culture, right? So how many movies have been made about, Navy SEALs versus Army Rangers? Well, the biggest one I can think of is the movie Navy SEALs with Charlie Sheen. That's kind of their Hollywood movie that has kind of survived them, and lots of other movies have been made. Well, think about how many movies have been made about Army Rangers. You think of any off the top of your head?
I've only seen 25 movies in my life, so I'm not a good person.
So
Pierre, any?
Okay, so that's the thing, right? There have been a few. So Black Hawk Down is one of them that was made. But what was that about? That was about one of our biggest failures, right? Saving Private Ryan. Once again, everyone died. It was a failure, of a mission essentially. And so,
so Rangers fell and SEALs don't. Is that what you're?
Well, Pierre, we're about to see how fast you can move. For whatever it is with the Hollywood aspect, like there's definitely not as much glamour, because when you think about it, what we do in Army Rangers is we do the little things to a level of excellence that manifests publicly to what people are seeing as something that is incredible and professional and high level. And that's like when people ask the secret sauce of Rangers or Army Special Operations, it's about doing the little things to such a ridiculously high standard of excellence that when it comes together, it looks like the success that everybody wants to have. And so with the Rangers, it's like it's not as sexy as everyone thinks it is. It looks like it. And if you watch, if you go on YouTube or you look at some of our training videos or recruiting videos are out there, stuff looks pretty good. It looks Hollywood, but all it is.
To wear night vision goggles.
Yeah, of course.
Okay.
Yeah. So everything we do is under pretty much night. From 2002 to 2010, I think I was nocturnal the entire time through my career. So the mission set's very similar. I think the main difference is just, the culture. Like the Rangers just a little more quieter. The successes aren't really known. The failures are made into, have been made historically in Hollywood videos. And it's just that there hasn't really been anyone out there that's tried to push that stuff for whatever reason. And I won't say whether it's they have a better marketing platform or whatever. I think it's just that, the Rangers, one of our mottos is we'll never leave a Ranger behind. And, Black Hawk Down. One guy died, 19 more died trying to save that one guy, recover his one body. Battle of Cisterna in World War II, 725 out of 775 Rangers died, I believe, in that battle. Only 200 actually died in the battle. The other 500 died going back to try and recover the other 200. And so the culture that's kind of cultivated within there is kind of keep your head down, make sure everybody gets home. That's what the main priority is, not necessarily advertising. And I'm not saying that's what the SEALs, culture, because I'd never worked in there. But going back to Ranger School versus Buds, so David does a great job of, David Goggins in his book of articulating Special Tactics Warfare School for the Air Force, which he went through and passed, Bud's School, which he passed, and Army Ranger School, which he passed. So that guy went through all three of them, and to my knowledge, he's still the only person that's done it. So he does a good job of talking about the process. When guys go into SEAL school, and a lot of it's just the way that they recruit, and I'm not saying that the Rangers way is any better than the SEALs way is, but if you wanted to go join the Navy SEALs, you could go join the SEALs today and be in Buds, a week after you're done with basic training.
Then I'd be out of Buds in about 24 hours.
And most guys are, and that's the way it's set up. The Army Rangers, you don't go to Ranger school until you've been in the Army for, enlist a guy, be anywhere from 12 to 24 months. Like Pat Tillman, I don't think he ever went through Ranger school, unfortunately, before he died, because he just didn't have time, because we send guys to the unit first to train, make sure they're ready, then send them. Where Buds, it's kind of dump a bunch of guys in there, see which one kind of floats up to the top. So the Army is more about investing in, the Ranger individually, where the SEALs kind of look at, see who floats to the top at the end, and then they go to the SEAL teams. So with SEAL school, I know that like a couple of my friends that have gone, they leave there 20 pounds heavier because they eat every single day, 5,000 calories. They sleep, except outside of that hell week, a decent amount. Where at Ranger school, the expectation when you show up is you've already met the standard. And so when you come, it's like, we don't care what you can physically do because you already met the standard to get here. We're going to take away all of that physical that you have. We're going to take away your sleep. We're going to take away the fuel that fuels that physical. And we're going to see what's left and see if you can lead 44 of your fellow Ranger buddies that are in the same shape. And so with Ranger school, it's about stripping away everything that you have and seeing what you have left and whether you can still pass the course or not.
All right, let's dive into that. How many calories a day?
1,000. It's 1 MRE a day that you get while you're there.
What kind of food?
Oh my gosh. An MRE is, and I believe they've changed it.
What does
since
MRE
I went
stand
through.
for?
Meal ready to eat.
Okay.
I think it's translated in French as straight ass. But it's horrible food that's, dehydrated. They sit on the shelf. I'm pretty sure the ones I got in Ranger school were from the Vietnam class that I went through. So it's, they're horrible. It's not nutrition. It's just horrible.
So it's
stuff.
like a school lunch.
It's worse than a school lunch. It's a school lunch that was sitting there from 25 years prior. It's like your parents' school lunch.
So is it like a shitty space food?
Yes, that's actually a very accurate description. I'll get you one. And I get one when your wife has her baby. I'll get you guys. You guys can go on a little MRE
Here,
picnic.
Look what he wants to give you. That's awesome.
Yeah. You and your wife can go on an MRE picnic.
Yeah, I'm going to give it to Pierre and his wife, actually. I'm a generous guy. I like to give things away.
Yeah, I would not do that to you, Pierre. But it's each one has 1,000 calories in it. And so you get one of those a day. But you're burning on average 7,000 calories a day while you're in Ranger school. And that's all you get for the time that you're in there. There's no pauses.
How much water are you getting?
The water is pretty much unlimited because that's like a safety
good.
issue.
Is it filtered?
We filter ourselves. Get iodine tablets.
What? So where are you getting water from?
Streams, creeks, swamps. Because you got 3 phases. You got Florida phase, you got Benning phase, which is first 3 to 4 weeks are at Fort Benning, Georgia, and it's called RAP phase, Ranger Assessment phase, which means they basically just beat the crap out of you for 3 to 4 weeks and see if you're still standing at the end. And that's where you lose probably like half the class during that time. And when I went through, and I believe the standards are a little bit higher, or not standards, but the percentages. But I know when I went through, there were 300 of us that started, and I think 18 that finished from that group of guys. So the pass rate, not extremely high, but you can recycle and keep going. So for me, fortunately, Ranger school was only 61 days. There's some guys that were there for a lot longer and looked a lot worse than I did by the end. But, for that entire time, your sleep is anywhere from an hour to 2 hours a night. And, your food is 1,000 calories a day, no exceptions unless you're going to steal food, and then you're screwed and you're going to get your, what beat. And then you're constantly moving with 120 pounds on your back. And that's for 61 straight days. So it's like a hell 2 months. Is the way that David described it, I believe, in his book. So the SEALs have that week.
All right, so I've listened to his book twice, and I don't remember that.
Yeah, well, so he talks about the Ranger. He gives a pretty
I remember him
good,
talking about Ranger School. I guess I just didn't. I was like, don't kill me. But I was like, oh, he's talking about the easier thing he did before Buzz.
So he actually says on the record there that Army Ranger School was the hardest school that he'd been through.
Yeah, Tom.
He does say that.
Tom Billio, actually, I don't know how to say that last name. I'm talking about the guy who started the nutrition company. They sold for like $1 billion. They're a bar company.
Okay.
Anyway, I think on his podcast, I actually do remember him talking about that.
Yeah. So, the schools are just different, right? The SEAL school serves a very specific purpose, right? They're building SEALs. Where Ranger School is about, you're already in the unit. We're seeing if you meet the standard to stay in the unit, and we're going to take away all those things that make you strong.
So what's the training every day? Like, you're there 61 days, and you're not eating. Like, what are you doing?
Oh, just complete jackassery. It changes, but it's mostly just running small unit level missions. So, you'll start out at the squad size. You'll have 9 Rangers the first 3 to 4 weeks while you're there. And then when you get up to mountains, you go up to platoon size, which is 44. And then, so you do the first 3 to 4 weeks at Benning, Camp Darby. And then you go up to Dahlonega, Georgia, which is probably the most backwards part of the country that I've ever experienced in my entire life. You're up there for 3 to 4 weeks, and it's just going up and down the Tennessee National Divide in northern Georgia for 3 to 4 weeks. And then you finish that, and if you pass, you go down to Florida and you jump in the swamp and you go hang out with alligators for 3 to 4 weeks. And you do swamp operations, and that's where your water comes from, is the swamps.
And so you're just drinking swamp water, but then taking a tablet to...
Yeah, I put an iodine tablet in there, just drop a little, drop that in there.
Jeez.
I'm they may have like upgraded the standards since then.
Right. You were telling me you got the COVID vaccine.
I have, yes. And I had the COVID.
You seem like a guy that COVID couldn't kill if COVID tried its hardest.
So I had it. I had COVID. My daughter gave it to me. We think her pediatrician gave it to her, and then she gave it to me. So when she got it, she was very scared of it. I was kind of, I realized very quickly.
Get scared? Have you ever been scared of anything?
Yeah, of course. Come on.
Okay.
Yeah, there's things out there. I'm sure if we went down the rabbit hole enough, then we'd eventually find it. But no, so it wasn't, but I did realize the danger it had towards, people that were at risk. I did not meet any of those risk criteria, and so I wasn't worried about it personally, but I understood, and I have my whole, that's why I published that book, was because of COVID. I was so frustrated with how people were dealing with COVID that was the reason why I put that book out, Un-Winnable Wars. But I had it. My daughter was scared to death of it because her mother, kind of who I'm not married to anymore, kind of had a more fearful, which is her right, opinion towards it. And so my daughters were like scared to death of it. And my youngest daughter, Camille, who just turned 10, and then my oldest daughter, Addison, is 13. She was just scared to death of it, and it was driving her life. And so she had come down. We were going to go up and do a recruiting visit at the University of Oklahoma. She's a gymnast, and that's when they start looking at those girls.
At 13.
No, she's the 10-year. So she was 9 at the time.
What?
Yeah. So it's crazy. My daughter trains with 15 and 16-year-old girl. Like, she was telling me now, she's like, oh yeah, Malaya is getting a car for her birthday. I'm like, the girl in your class? And she's like, yeah. I'm like, how old is she? She's 16. So is
she trying for the Olympics?
That's what she wants to do.
Okay.
I'm just being supportive dad in it. Her mother was a All-American gymnast at the University of Washington, was on the Olympic route, burned out, and then came back through the college route. And so it's a tough, I have the utmost respect for those female Olympic gymnasts. I don't know any of the male aspect, but I'm sure they're just as hardcore. But it's a crazy life. So I'm just being supportive dad. If she likes to do it now, so I support it. So she was coming down. University of Oklahoma has the best gymnastics program currently in the country. So she came down. We flew down here. And I, of course, got the call as soon as she got down here that the doctor that she'd been around tested positive for COVID. And I'm like, you've got to be kidding me. And so I know my daughter's like super scared of this. So I'm starting to notice, my throat is a little itchy and I'm a little more tired. I've got a headache, but it's because I worked out hard. And so I let it ride for a day, but I quarantined us. And so then it kind of started getting a little worse. And so I went in secretly, had someone watch my daughter that had already had COVID. And I went in and got tested. And sure enough, I was positive. I'm like, oh man. So gymnastics trip gets canceled, which, oh, by the way, the whole team got COVID at the same time. So it didn't matter. It would have been canceled. And so I'm sitting here. So I know that I have it because I was fortunate to get access to a rapid test and find out right away. And the main fear, man, was for my daughter because I knew that she was so driven by fear. So I actually didn't say anything about it for the first 4 days that I knew that I had it. I just stomached it and swallowed it up and told her that the club was shut down during the day and that they were just letting us come out because they would let us come out to the course at 4 p.m., her and I, just to get outside. And so once I knew that she had it and she was fine and she's asymptomatic, I actually was able to turn it around of hey, listen, honey, you beat COVID. See? You are that awesome. This has done nothing to you. There's nothing for you to fear. And so it ended up being a great experience for her because she owned it and she beat it and she helped daddy beat it. Now I pretended for 2 weeks that it didn't affect me. And what I've actually worked with some people that I do some consulting for when their, senior management gets COVID is listen, take a knee and take a break. Cause I pretended everything's wrong. And honestly, it did kick my butt I just didn't let it be known to anybody and kept going along with everything. But it took me about 3 months to fully recover. Like my lung capacity was shot. Like I wasn't able to do any of like the row combine workouts that I normally do. And so it gave me a run for my money, but I mean, I was okay. So I did decide I had to get the vaccine because if I wanted to continue to work with the US snowboarders that I was working with, I had to get it. So for me, it was like, all right, well, those guys are important to me. And
the only point I was trying to make is that you're a badass. Why'd you get a vaccine? You're not scared of COVID.
Oh, well, yeah. I mean, yeah, there's a whole lot of, it's amazing how it's become political now. I mean, literally on the way over here, I was on the phone with somebody as, you know, we were talking earlier, doesn't matter who they worked for, about, you know, just the dynamic right now in the country of like, if you don't get the virus. So I probably would have gotten it anyway, just because of, you know, the current, you know, trends and stuff. But the main reason for getting it was I want to be able to go roll with my buddies, right? Yeah. You know, like if I have a choice to get a vaccine or not go like throw down with Olympic caliber athletes, I'm going to take the vaccine because I want to go play. And so that was the main driver behind it, was getting to just go out and have fun and go rip down the mountains with likes of Lucas Foster and Josh Bowman.
I got COVID twice.
Dude, you're a double winner. Like you're like Kyle Murray, who got drafted #1 by the A's and by the Cardinals.
So at this point, it's just like everybody's first response when I say that is like, "Oh, so you got a mild case?" Like I'm like, "Whoa." It's weird.
I would have suggested you were irresponsible, but okay.
I was not a spreader, I guess, because I was at events both times, and nobody I was at the events with got it. So I either have a really weak immune system, or I'm not a spreader, or all my friends have strong immune systems. One of the two.
So that doctor had a mask on the entire time,
like cloth mask or a N95.
I'm sure he had an important one on, but
he probably did. He probably had a cloth.
But regardless, so the mask. So the whole spreading of it. And the thing is, I was around people. Dude, the day, like that one day before he gave me that call to let me know, we were around people. None of them got it. So there's no rhyme or reason. I am not going to suggest you have a weak immune system. I don't think. I mean, did it take you out? Were you down and out?
Yeah. So it was so strange. So I just woke up. I was in Miami, but I was at like Four Seasons Miami. Like I was not like Miami Life kind of thing with like a mastermind group.
Okay.
And keep in mind, my wife didn't get it when I got it.
She did not, or she did?
She did not get it.
So so you're saying the stronger genes are on her side.
Well, she got it like a month later.
Okay. It eventually caught up with her.
No, when like right around the time she got pregnant, she got it, which we think is like something to do with like her immune system being a little weaker during like pregnancy or whatever. But anyway, hers was almost undetectable. She felt a little strange, and her father, who's a lot older, was going to be coming into town, and so just had to get tested and tested positive. For me, I had like 102-degree fever, and I had body aches, and I've never had body aches before. And I was like, this is the strain. I feel so awful. And I'm like still like kind of trying to lay up by the pool. I'm like, that doesn't make me feel better. Like whatever. It's just because I never quarantined or wore a mask. Like I wore a mask when I was required to, but you know, like just walking in a park or whatever. Like I hung out with friends. I did all the things I guess you're not supposed to do or whatever. I was just very about like going to live my life and not going to be around people that are high risk. So like I didn't see my parents a lot. Like I just tried to be like responsible. So I was hanging out with other 35-year-olds, and I was like, this is fine. And I typically hang out with people that have their life together. So they work out twice a day, and they, you know, they're just like take care of themselves. I knew that like they'll be fine if they get COVID. I know that's not the case for everybody. Nobody died in my network. So actually 2 mentors died, so that's wrong. But they both had a lot of pre-existing conditions, and had made decisions to be like, hey, if it knocks me out, it knocks me out.
Dude, I have Ranger friends that are battalion commanders that are getting medically chaptered out of the Army for long. Like, it's how this thing has hit people. It's there. I don't think there's any rhyme or reason. I mean, their lung capacity, like they can't run anymore. And that was like was similar. What happened with me was, and what I think it is, and what I, at least from the research I did, from my own personal experience, like COVID is something, it's like cancer, right? It's like it it feeds off of this almost fear type thing. Like, and they've even done research on cancer patients, right? The ones that are scared are the ones that don't do as well. And the ones that have a good support network and think they can beat it are the ones that do better. With COVID, like, you can't do push-ups to make COVID get out of your system, right? You just have to take a knee and chill out for a couple weeks. And I'm assuming you're probably like me and you didn't want to chill out and you still kept doing all your work. You still kept like serving people. So you just went head for...
Kind of. So this one. So okay. So like body aches, everything's bad. I get kicked off my flight home because I coughed one time, and I was like, "This is like everybody's." Then they just put me on the next flight, which is even crazier.
Responsible.
So I get home. Okay, I had to get home. I can't afford $500 a night at the Four Seasons. I can't quarantine there. The mastermind group paid for the hotel room. So anyway, I get home. And I still don't know what I have. Like, for some reason, my mind is too stupid to figure out I have COVID, even though I have like all these symptoms. And it's just because, again, I'd been around so many people and never gotten it. And I just was like, at this point, I was like, oh, I'm not going to get it or I'll be asymptomatic. I guess I just told myself that. So I get home and I bite into food and I can't taste it. And at that very moment, I was like, oh, I have COVID.
Yeah, I didn't have those symptoms. Like, I didn't have a fever ever. I could taste food. I lost my taste for 3 weeks and the smell for 6 weeks. Yeah, that didn't happen to me. Which I was really hoping, because I'm like, finally I can eat tomatoes or onions, but no, it hits everybody differently.
You're a smart guy. Did it come from a lab or did it come from a bat?
I have opinions. We can talk about them off air. It's interesting. I mean, if you just observe, like, regardless of whether it came from a lab or whether it came from a bat or whether it came from a dumbass, what I think is more important is observing how we reacted to it. And as a country,
it wasn't good.
I would give us not an A.
Or a B.
I think everybody's required to get B's now in college. So but I mean, that's the more concern for me is like, yeah, you can talk about conspiracies all left and right. And yes, if I was going to try and take down the United States, if I was another country, this would be a great way to do it. You can talk about those, and all that's going to do is just spread fear. My main concern and what I want to learn from, and why I published that book, and in the dedication, which the dedication was like 12 pages long, the publisher made me cut it down to a page and a half and made me take out a lot of what they considered offensive language towards people not willing to do the right thing. But it's like the reaction afterwards and how we dealt with it and what can be learned from that. Because what that book is about is it's actually about the Vietnam War, and it's about my predecessors, the special operations guys. But that book is about a huge victory in the Vietnam War that was forgotten about in history. And had I had the information that was in that book as a company commander, probably would have done a lot better. Maybe not as many of my guys would have died. And so what I want to look at from this period is like, what can we learn from it? What can we learn where we're exposed, and how can we mitigate, those levels of exposure that we have? And that's what I'm more concerned about. I know that's not everybody, but that's kind of where my focus is. Like I said, if you want to talk off air about the origin story, we can do that.
To me, for that to happen, we have to depoliticize it. Because right now, like, I had a friend who didn't go to our wedding party because he was like scared of getting COVID. And I had like essentially he was scared of COVID because like he was more on one side of a spectrum than the other. Like there's a very much like it got very politicized. Like, oh, I'm not going to that's my whole thing is like how politicized it got.
You know what would have been interesting? And that's a great point, is what if President Trump at the time would have said, this is going to kill everybody. We need to lock everything down. We need to all wear masks. We need to, have you ever thought about that? Like, honestly, had he taken a hardline stance on the masks, would we be wearing masks right now? Would we be so
that's what I'm saying is the other side would be like, I'm not wearing a mask.
That's what I'm really curious about. And listen, for me, there's a lot of reasons why COVID was the best thing that ever happened to me. By nature, I am an isolationist. I don't like people. Like, I like to be by myself so I can protect myself and set up my own fortifications. Like, what people see in terms of like my public life and stuff like that, a lot of that is me recovering from my absolute lack of emotional capability to interconnect with human beings, right? And people mistake it for being an extrovert. It's actually not the case, right? So with COVID for me, it was like a great thing. I was like, I can actually not be offensive by telling someone stay 8 feet away from me. Like, I mean, like literally my golf cart, I put like a little umbrella holder on it on my little motorized golf cart to like as a saber, right? To keep people like in justification. No one could say anything because I said social distancing. So for me, it was like, it wasn't bad because I just wanted to be left alone to begin with. But the politicized issue that you bring up is, interesting, and we'll see how it plays out, through the next couple of years, and then how it manifests in the next presidential election or even the 2022 elections that are coming out. But that's part of it. I think part of it too is the fact that, doing the right thing is not always the easiest thing to do. Look at companies right now that are saying like, we can't hire people. There is no one to hire because everyone's staying home. It's still on unemployment benefits. It's so, it gets a lot deeper, but those are the things that I'm more concerned about than your initial question, just to kind of wrap the circle back around that rat hole, because you'd asked whether I thought it started from a lab or a rat. I'm more concerned, or a bat. I'm more concerned about with where we are, what can be learned from it, and how it can be fixed. And like literally let me grab the book because we mentioned the dedication. So the first part of the dedication, so when you do a dedication for a book, that's supposed to be where you thank all the women that helped you, which I probably should have done that. Right. But so this is the dedication, and it's only, as you can see on there, like literally a page and a half long. It said, this book is dedicated to all the people suffering right now during the absolute uncertain times of a global pandemic, riots, and a political divide threatening civil war in the United States. Many around the world are suffering because the hard-fought wisdom to get through struggles such as this were kept hidden, never documented, or simply ignored. This book was written to show that someone cares and wants to share historical examples of hard-fought wisdom that are found in the lowest of ashes of defeat, the Vietnam War. In a period of multiple problems manifesting a single point in time, our perception of others working just as hard to solve another problem might be distorted. I'm less concerned with finding who is to blame with where we are and more concerned with finding the path back to exceptionalism, not just for America, but for anyone willing to attack the obstacles in life rather than spend all efforts avoiding them. Those obstacles provide opportunities for growth and the ability to creatively think our way out of difficult situations. The obstacle is the way, right?
Ryan Holiday, have you read that book?
Yeah, so I did, and by the way, Ryan, if you are listening to this, I did cite you on there. So I just forgot. As Ryan Holiday put it,
it's one of my favorite. It's one of my favorite books. So I was like, well, did this dude just steal Ryan Holiday's quote?
No, I cited him in there. No, so I am a Stoic, like the Stoic philosophy. So like the Phoenix Project is about, living an exceptional life across the mental, emotional, physical, and spiritual planes of existence. Well, one thing that I haven't really talked publicly a lot about is that operating system that holds all of this together. And it doesn't matter what it is. It's just you have to have something. It's like having a computer that doesn't have an operating system. You have all these cool apps, the mental app, the emotional app, the physical, the spiritual app. But if you don't have an operating system holding it together, a guiding philosophy, you're not going to go anywhere. And for me, that guiding philosophy is Stoicism. Big fan of it. General McChrystal, who wrote the foreword to this book, is a renowned Stoic. And so, thank you. And so, for me, it's, I spent a lot of my life, trying to figure out why the 14 Rangers under my command died. What can I do to bring them back? What can I do to make sure that their memory stays intact? And living in that past is often very unproductive. And so once I was able to figure out, okay, it's not necessarily about what you did yesterday, it's about what you do today and tomorrow. And that's ultimately what matters, is where I was able to start finding, new direction in my life, success, and then being able to pass it on to, in some cases, the Olympic athletes I worked with. So when I'm on the golf course, which I do play way too much golf, I admit that publicly. I'll have a lot of guys your age or, closer to my age, which we're not that. You say you're 35?
I'm 27.
27? Okay.
I just hang out with 35-year-olds.
Take it a compliment then. So between our age groups, 27, 30, or 41, I think that's how old I am. Yes. Just turned 41. There's a lot of guys that I'll play with that'll feel bad that they didn't serve, right? Because a lot of them had the opportunity to pursue the business type stuff that I didn't because I chose to stay in, the community that I was in. And then it ended up not working out for me because I was too injured to continue on. And so they'll feel bad about that. And I'll say every time, I'll say the same thing. I say, listen, man, I don't care. Like, all I care about is what you do today. Be an arranger today to your family, to your business, to whatever nonprofit you want to, devote your time towards
Charity
a podcast. What's that? Charity water, whatever it is. Like, that's what I'm more concerned about, because we can't change yesterday. And to sit there and, yes, reflect, learn, you meditate on it, but like, it's unproductive to think about. And we obviously covering a lot of life lessons in terms of how I look at things, not just the COVID thing, but that's what I have found personally works. And especially when I deal with people, because I can sit there and be bitter all day long. Like my peers that got out after 4 years of service and got to go work for McKinsey and are now making $1 million a year as consultants today, did that because they got out of it for 4 years. Well, I didn't. So, I had the chance, but I chose to stay in because I had already had my MBA at that point. But I made a decision and she's in. Now I can sit there and look at my mistake of not getting out and avoiding being wounded the 4 times or 3 additional times that I did after that. Or I can sit there and be grateful for the experiences that I've had and the opportunities that I have, today, and show that to other people that maybe feel guilty about it or feel shamed. And I'm like, no, dude, I'm more impressed by someone that wants to be a ranger within what they're doing today than someone that sits there and just feels bad about what they maybe didn't do when they were in college or whatever.
So there's something you said in that intro that I think is the root of all these problems. We have lost that America is exceptional.
Yeah. So I put in there a very well-worded thing to make sure I didn't offend anybody that was offended by American exceptionalism and that's because I have a lot of friends that are overseas. Like this company, the shirt that I'm wearing, you versus you. This is the only shirt I wear to work out. And it's because when I look in the mirror, I realize it's not about me versus Lucas Foster or Josh Bowman or Nathan in the gym. It's about me versus me.
Wow,
and that's actually not completely
easy.
That's not completely true. I'm always competing in everything I do, but it's a reminder to me to keep that competition. Well, they're Australian. They're Australian SAS guys, like badasses that served their countries. And so like I was careful with that because I wanted to show respect, because it wasn't just me fighting over there. We had Brits, some badass British SAS guys were there, Australian SAS guys, Japanese special operations guys. We had everybody. And so I wanted to make it clear that like the stuff that I write about is available for anybody. It's not just for them. There are a lot of people, especially on the international, platform. And once again, this comes back to what we were talking about earlier in the kitchen or up in the ping pong table as we're already immersed in competition. The whole idea of, okay, of why I'm going to get my PhD. Like if I want to truly make an impact for people, then I have to choose to meet them where they are oftentimes. And so that statement that I put in there was worded very, very carefully because I am proud of America. I bleed red, white, and blue. My family has since the 1600s, before it was even the United States of America. So I do want to see America being exceptional. I want to see it come back to the exceptionalism that it has the potential to still be. But I don't think it's not a half empty, cup situation. I think everybody's got the opportunity to be exceptional. But I am curious of your definition of this American exceptionalism, to put you on the spot a little bit, because I'm sure we probably think the same thing. But I'm curious.
So when you see people doing the things they're doing, which is like pushing for Marxism and pushing for socialism and spending their entire life hating a president, whether it's Biden or Trump, spending their entire life around it, it's because they really hate themselves, but they also hate their country. And when you look at the 50s and 60s, and I talked about this on my last podcast, so it is what it is, but
that's right.
We were going somewhere. And it was actually Peter Thiel, one of the founders of PayPal, who was talking about, his book 0 to 1. Have you read it?
I've not.
So he kind of talks about like going 0 to 1 is what's impressive. And so from nothing to from something literally not existing to existing. And so like us never going to the moon to going to the moon, that's 0 to 1. And these big these big long shots, right? And it's like the whole country gets around and says, yeah, we're America. We're awesome. We're going to do this thing. We're going to spend, in today's equivalent, $265 billion to go to the moon. So I look at this and I just saw a country that was united around being awesome, around exceptionalism, about taking pride in the products you produce and the things you do and how you love your neighbor and how you serve your community, so on and so forth. And I've seen this loss of that, which I think comes from a loss of people loving their country. And so American exceptionalism, a country that has done such exceptional things, I love that to me, that's what it is. It's about this common core that we can all get around and say, look, we might disagree on a bunch of things, but at the end of the day, we're the greatest country the world's ever known, and let's get around that and do more exceptional things like we've done in our past. And not to say we aren't scarred or haven't made mistakes, obviously.
So the way that you're making your assumptions, so you're with that thinking, you have to assume that people first want to be exceptional. Like, because you said that you felt that it was like the fear or the hate of the country or dislike, whatever the words was that used it. But I would walk it a step back and bring it back to the individuals of what happens when you have a bunch of people that don't necessarily want to win or want to be exceptional or want to do the right thing. And I think that's
it terrifies me.
Like, well, but that's how you get to the point that, so why was there this? I mean, and there are some legitimate arguments to, why people are like, why American exceptionalism offends people. And it's because it's the assumption, incorrectly, I believe, that it means that everybody else in the world has to lose in order for us to be exceptional. I don't think that that's the way that it has to be, but there's an assumption there, right? I believe it to be incorrect, but it's still an assumption that's there. But I think what it comes back to is you're assuming that everybody wants to win to begin with. Well, if people want to win, they have to want to do the right thing in order to set the conditions to win. And those sometimes are hard. And like I said there in the book, it's like the whole obstacle thing of people like wanting to avoid all the obstacles in life, like hacking everything that we do. And yes, there are some like great life. I use them all the time. I've got this smartphone here that if I was like, I hate technology, but I can't negate what it's done in order to make my life better. But like, there's a certain point where you have to understand, like, if people aren't willing to do the work, you're not going to be exceptional. And that's where I'm trying, like with my work, I try to show people the results of doing, like embracing those obstacles and what ends up happening. And as long as they stick with me long enough, they'll be able to see that. And you're fortunately one of those people that just was born with that, it sounds like, or had conditions where you grew up in where you had no choice but to face that and embrace it and embrace the suck, as we like to say, in the community that I grew up in. But not everyone does. So when you're there and you realize, well, what do you do about it at that point? Because if you're trying to fix America or fix this exceptionalism thing, I think there might be part of the problem that is not being acknowledged, where if you miss it, like that's where people kind of go off in their different ways. And I wrote in there that, what if people are like, what if other people are trying to solve a problem? Like, what if Pierre is trying to solve a problem with all of his heart and all of his intent that just happens to step on the toes of my problem? Well, I'm going to be automatically offended because I think that he's sending all of his life's energy into like offending me when all he's trying to do is the next right thing within his lane of life. And so if people can realize that and kind of step back and realize that they have the same intentions that I do, or I have the same intentions they do, we're just going along different paths. And then there's a choice of whether you respect those paths or you don't. Now, I think most people, if they know, like I'm assuming that if you said something that offended me and I said, hey man, you're making me want to cry right now, literally, you would probably be like, okay, I apologize. Let's redirect and we'll put a boundary on that issue. I'm sure you do that. Just like I would do the same thing. And I'm sure Pierre would. Most people just won't even stop and ask that or even think about it. And they just assume that people's energies are going towards, attacking their problems, all that stuff. We're getting into some deep level. This is literally the rabbit hole of like human psychology. We're like trying to solve a problem that arguably is unwinnable. But you know what? Listen, man, I think that's the difference maker though. The people that are willing to attack those problems, are willing to ask the questions, and more importantly, willing to listen.
And willing to be wrong.
Dude, I guarantee you, I probably hold the world record for being wrong, like the amount of times in my life. And I own that. And the only difference that I like to believe that I made a change in is like learning from failure, right? And like welcoming it. Like Tim Kennedy has a great concept called hurry up and fail, like, which is something that I would have never thought of, but it's like, where do you most learn? Like from your failures, right?
It's so funny. That's what I talk about. My whole life, I've wanted a family, as strange as that is.
No, I get it, man. That's why I got married before Iraq. The only reason.
And I looked at dating as like building a company, in the sense of that when you start a company, my goal was for it to fail, because I knew that if after everything it was still there could be something powerful. Mm-hmm. And so I would like on my wife and I's first date, I
would love to hear her impression on this, by the way.
First off, I ordered a pizza and a burger that we split. So things that require her to eat with her hands. And then I was like, so what are your thoughts on what happens when you die? Just go straight into it.
No.
And here we are several years later, happily married, kid about to be born. But the many, many women before her, one woman now, it was this thing of like, all right, this guy's a weirdo, or this guy doesn't, cause I didn't judge them for how they lived their life. I just said, look, I know what I want in life, and I'm going to find somebody that wants the same thing.
Yeah. No, I mean,
all that comes from knowing what you want.
That would have been great advice to have given 21-year-old Jesse, by the way. Yeah, my approach was definitely, I married my second girlfriend ever in my life.
Do you know what the success rate of that is?
For me, it's 0.
I know, but in general,
I would assume that it's not high.
It's actually extremely high.
Oh. So the one guy from my unit that's still married met his wife on the internet, Facebook, and like asked her to marry him before they'd even met in person. So that's interesting, and there's a whole chapter in the book about that process.
Do you follow Jordan Peterson at all?
Oh yeah. Dr. Jordan. I respect him.
So
I don't like him, but I respect him. He doesn't say things that make my heart smile.
Yeah, same. So in his latest book, 12 More Rules for Life, mm-hmm. I got to the chapter on marriage, and I thought I was doing a pretty good job at marriage. And I was like, damn, this is intense. Yeah. And I think that about most things. Like the thing is, I pat myself on the back when I get to something, I'm doing all the right things, and then it's like, okay. And then I get to another chapter, I'm like, oh man. But he talks about something which is talked about all the time in the Christian circle to convince people not to move in before they're married, which is if people move in before they're married and then get married, they have a much higher divorce rate than people that don't live together before getting married.
Really?
Yeah.
Those were the statistics?
Yeah.
Yeah. So we did not live together before we got married. Like I said, she was the second. I mean, the only reason, and my ex-wife, the mother of my children, Lauren, I have grown to have, an appreciation for her that I did not have, previously. She is the mother of we got married when I was 21 years old. I mean, I wasn't even a Ranger yet, but I think when I proposed to her, I think I told her like, I'm going to be a Ranger. So that's why you should marry me. Like I was not operating. I was operating on a level of confidence that in fact, I think if you were to talk to her, she'd tell you about a PowerPoint presentation that I made, like of why she should date me instead of the like IT geek that she was currently, I think, engaged to when I stole her away from the guy at the start of my senior year. And it came down to this like 30-page PowerPoint presentation and it all came down to, I'm going to be a Ranger. I'm going to go defend your freedom. What's this guy going to do? That's not necessarily the right thing. But yeah, the only reason why I proposed to her was I was convinced that I was in a Lieutenant Dan situation from Forrest Gump and that I had a very high chance of not making it back from combat. And I had watched several families disintegrate in front of me as a child. And that was the one thing that I wanted to do right, was family. And so I proposed to her and said, I want to get married before Ranger school because I know I'm going on the first thing smoking afterwards. So if I die, I can say that I did this one thing right. And I did almost die 2 weeks into the first deployment. My truck got blown off a bridge by an RPG, and I spent 4 minutes underwater, and I spent a week in a hospital taking a nap and woke up. And when I went down into that vehicle and drowned, I went through the whole asphyxiation process. I thought about three things. Thought about the fact that I was never going to see my wife again. Thought about the fact that I was never going to have kids. And I thought about I was never going to play Pinehurst #2 golf course. And those are the three things I thought about. And when I woke up a week later,
Pinehurst really came in your mind.
That was the third thing. And that's the whole connection with golf. So that was my first full 18 holes of golf was on Pinehurst #2 golf course. And they caught me a free round after, because one of the nurses wrote a sworn statement that was the first thing I was blabbering about when I started coming to was Pinehurst. And so those are the three things I thought about. And, so my ex-wife and I, we never spent more than 8 continuous days together from the time we were married, actually from the time we were engaged, until we had been married for 8 years and already had a child. We had never spent more than 8 continuous days.
You were married for 8 years?
And we didn't, because my deployment cycles. We were never, no, I was married for 14 years. Yeah. Okay. And so I was married for 14 years.
So I thought this was like a 1-year marriage.
No. We had two beautiful kids, Addison and Camille, from it. And
I live in Camille, by the way.
Yeah. So, yeah.
Name Addison is nice too. I'm not showing the truth.
Yeah. Well, Addison was named because I was absolutely convinced she was a boy. Like I even brought Windex in to like wash off the ultrasound monitors, and that's what the nurses at Fort Bragg still remember me, because you're looking for the 3 little lines if it's a boy or a girl. And so Addison's translated son of Adam is what the translation is. But at the time, Private Practice was out, which I know you probably don't remember or know. Pierre might remember, but it was Addison Montgomery. She's like the hottest doctor on TV, right? So that was where the Addison name came from.
You named your daughter after a hot doctor on TV?
No, that was how I justified it to my wife at the time.
Okay. And your wife was cool with that?
Yeah, it was just because, it became a popular name.
Okay.
And then Camille, I'm a little embarrassed at how I came up with that one. But I knew someone named Camille, and had a ton of respect for her. And I wanted to set Camille up with the best opportunity, because she was a high risk pregnancy. It was touch and go through the 9 months. And so I wanted to set her up, and I figured giving her that name was by a fighter that I knew and respected, and wanted to give her the best chance. So with us, and we fought, so I got back done first from 2002 to 2010. We didn't spend more than 8 continuous days together. And that might be a generous number of what I'm saying. It might not have been that long. And then all of a sudden, 8 years later, 2010, when I come to do the fellowship with General McChrystal, that was the first time we had been together. So for 8 years, so we got married in 2002. And then for 8 years, I went off and fought wars. She stayed at home and, had a child, and became her professional career. And then we tried to come back 8 years later, and we had no idea who we were. And for 6 years, we tried to figure it out, and we ended up ending it in 2016. And it was the right thing to do at the time. It was what forced my hand to start the Phoenix Project, honestly. And so I've been able to get to a point of grace with her. But I can tell you, to your statistics, I was not one that worked out. But I don't think most people spend the next 8 years only spending 8 days.
This is the only point I wanted to make with that, is that the stats often blow my mind. I would not think that was true. My whole, I remember people in church being like, if you live, saying that and be like, there's no way that's true. And when you look it up and it's multiple studies, oh, this is true. And so I'm always just amazed by what I think I know better versus what tends to often be true.
Data is interesting. And with doing a PhD program, that's what you do, a lot of research, and you look at a lot of the data, and, I can see where it would, you can make arguments for both, but it's all interesting.
All right. So I want to go into, how many times have you been deployed?
A lot. So I was deployed every single calendar year from 2003 to 2011.
Okay.
Every single year I was deployed at least one time during the calendar year.
So let's go into this. How many times you've been blown up? 4 times. Injured 4 times.
Yeah, I was injured 4 times.
Okay.
Been blown up probably 50 plus. Yeah.
Okay. Take me through, you're on a bridge and you blow up, right?
So that was a RPG hit our truck and it got hit off a bridge. So it wasn't like an explosion. It was the RPG hit it, bridge collapsed, went down with the vehicle
So you
into
were
a canal.
in a vehicle when the bridge was
Yeah, and the bridge collapsed.
like that. All I can think about is Bourne. What's the Bourne movie?
Bourne Identity.
What's the guy's name?
Jason Bourne.
All I think about is Jason Bourne when his wife gets shot and he drives off the bridge.
Yeah, I remember that.
That's all I can think about. That's my scenery for this.
Yes.
Is that anywhere close?
Nah, well, so we were doing an assault mission.
Was this at night?
It was at night.
Okay.
It was at night under nods, night vision goggles. That's the short term for it. And so I was with the assault team. I was going to go in with the assault element that's going in. So I was on the back of the truck. And keep in mind, this is 2003. We don't have super cool vehicles and up armored Humvees. We have like basic stuff that we use sandbags to put on the bottom to try and keep shrapnel from coming up and hitting us underneath if we went over roadside bombs. So this is like super redneck, jerry-rigged up armor vehicles. So we're going over the bridge. RPG
the American
comes.
way.
Yep, get after it. Get some. So we go over the bridge, get hit. And so I'm on the back of the vehicle with the assault squad. Now, we were using like tow straps to keep us in the vehicle while we're driving 60 miles through these towns to keep us in. So truck gets hit, truck starts going down. Everyone goes off the sides to jump out. I go to jump out, but because I'm with the assault element, I'm on the end, the strap caught me and I couldn't get out and I went down with the vehicle. So the whole vehicle fell on top of me. So it flipped over and I went down in the bottom of the canal, was pinning me down. And my guys eventually were able to hook the same tow strap up. They kept me to another vehicle, lifted up enough to pull me out. And the medical report stated that I was under for just over 4 minutes, but I think that might have been an exaggeration by the medic. But I don't remember any of it. I remember fighting it because my weapon was my M4 was slung across my chest. And so I went down and my M4 went straight into the silt. And so even when they got the vehicle off, they couldn't get me out. And so they cut away all my body armor. My M4 was left. They never recovered it. It's still at the bottom of
so cool to hang in your wall.
I've got some other cool stuff. We'll have to have you over to the Fort Stewart someday. But so when they pulled me out, I was already unconscious. And I mean, when you go through asphyxiation, drowning, I would say is probably one of the worst ways to go until you've been through it. Like the secret to drowning is just hurry up and get it over with, because once you go into asphyxiation, it's a very peaceful state and you see the light and you get a chance to ponder, the three things that you never got to do in life. And then everything just went dark. And then a week later, and so I had my night vision goggles on. So they went back inside my eye sockets. So I had a double hematoma in both eyes. I could not open my eyes when I first came about. I'll never forget this. Jennifer McNamara, who was the wife, a nurse, second lieutenant nurse, was taking care of me. Her husband was one of my brother platoon leaders. And so when I woke up, I couldn't open my eyes, and all I saw was this, bright light, and I heard a bunch of female voices around me. Now, of course, I just took an international studies degree in Middle Eastern studies, so I've got a baseline knowledge of the Quran and Arabic and all this stuff. So I literally said, holy crap, the Islam version of heaven was right. The 82 virgins are here. And I'll never forget her slapping me upside the head, being like, no, Jesse, you're in Baghdad. It's Jennifer McNamara. And I'm like, oh God, I'm in hell. And so I've actually run into 4 of those nurses throughout my life that were in that room when I awoke. So I woke up, couldn't open my eyes for another day because they were swollen shut from the impact of the night vision going back my head. But next day I woke up and they came and got me, and I went right back in the fight. Less than 36 hours after waking up from a coma, I was right back in the battle. Not the smartest decision, and
so
reason number one why I have to wear these glasses.
So I'm guessing you did a lot of therapy. Yeah, you seem like a therapy guy. You seem like a guy that really, something happens, you take time off and work on yourself and meet with people.
I'm a big fan of therapy now.
Yeah.
So yeah, I went right back in the fight because there was another lieutenant that was waiting to take my spot. And, I had fought to get that platoon. I was the only non-West Point officer, I believe, in my unit at the time. And so I was already fighting that uphill battle. And so I went back, and it was dumb. I remember having just, horrible nightmares, flashbacks already, not sleeping to begin with because we're in the middle of a combat situation, but went back into it. And yeah, I took no break. So that was the first time. And then the next major time would be, so then I was hit by a lot of IEDs by vehicles. That's where a majority of the explosions that I have. So I think my medical records have documented 50 explosions that I was exposed to. It was a lot.
What's it like when you hit an IED?
It's like, I mean, I've never had, 10 professional football players all come and hit me at the same time, but I've heard people like kind of use that analogy. And it feels like everybody's coming at you from different directions and just coming at you. Like that's probably the best way to describe it. And a lot of it's because of the pressure, that happens when an explosion happens, especially if it's a direct hit on you. None of them messed me up. It wasn't until I got hit by the suicide bomber in March of 2007, which I was standing probably about 15, 20 feet from when it went off, that really rocked me. And that one was, I give kind of a detailed version of what happened in my TED Talk, but that was when my medic, so we had just taken down the Diyala River Valley, which is where ISIS ended up becoming. It was before it was a household name, and they sent a suicide bomber into us, and I was about 15, 20 feet from it. Fortunately for me, not for him, my best friend Ben Saban and our senior medic jumped in front of that suicide bomber, and so I got hit 19 times on the left side of my body, but he protected the front, and he unfortunately died that day. But I did get knocked out from that, and that blew me way back. But woke up a few seconds later and stayed in the fight, fought it for about 4 hours, and then went back to the hospital, had the shrapnel taken out, stitched up, didn't take any pain medication, and was back in the fight 4 hours later.
So a suicide bomber, when you see them walking up, like, did you ever take out somebody ahead of time thinking they were a suicide bomber?
Let's take a break.
When you're coaching these people, what do you do to keep them? What are you exactly doing for them? Let me ask that before I.
Yeah. So I wouldn't call it coach. I hate that term coaching. Like, no offense.
Mentoring?
No offense. So yeah, let's look at it for mentoring. I mean, like AM300 is set up as a consulting firm, right? Okay. So like I look at it as like a consulting service, that I'm providing. Zach and Lincoln is more of like a mentor, type thing, because they're 9 and 11. You can't treat 9 and 11-year-old kids the same way that you treat 21-year-old professional athletes. At least you shouldn't. And so it's more from a mentor standpoint. But, for me, it was never with the intent. I never went out with the intention of being a mentor or a coach or a consultant or anything. It was when I found the principles of the Phoenix Project that were working for me. And at the time was 37 when I started that process, and watching what I was now able to do physically, mentally, emotionally, like in the gym, performing, whether it be in business. And it was all from applying those principles from the Phoenix Project that I could undoubtedly say, this is why I'm having quote unquote success at this point. And it was more of just like a test bed with a couple of the athletes from US Ski and Snowboard of what ended up giving it the validity that has led me to being able to do it now.
So what do you do to keep these people's heads on and not elevating? Like, what do you do to fight self? Like, Ryan Holiday, ego's the enemy, right? Because the whole Simone Biles thing's going on right now. And I didn't know who she was. I don't mean to offend you, I just didn't know who she was. And my wife was very into watching the gymnastics. I think like most people, it's cool. And about how good she is and everything. And she comes on TV and she says, first it shows her walking in and it cuts to somebody stitching a goat on her jacket because she's the greatest of all time. And then it cuts back to her and she goes, no one ever comes back to the Olympics better than they were, except for me. And I go, I really hope God doesn't humble this person. I'm just thinking like, man, like this would be, so then I watch her like not do good on a routine and drop out and then blame mental health. And since it's mental health, you can't say anything about it. You can't question whether it's mental health or not. And so I won't, maybe it is. And so I'm saying my own personal opinion is that she was not performing well. And her ego is so big that she couldn't handle getting a silver or a bronze. So she chose to just remove herself from the race. That's my personal feelings on it. I won't ask for yours because you work in this space and I don't want to ruffle any feathers.
Thank you.
But I think it's safe to say that she definitely has an ego of some sort. What do you do to help the people you work with not have that?
Okay, so this comes back to the point that we were discussing earlier about, was it the bat or was it the lab, right? So with Simone, that hits a little closer to home for me for various reasons. Number one, like I said, my work and some of the people that I'm honored and humbled, to get the opportunity to even share space with. Second thing is, remember I told you my ex-wife was an All-American gymnast. So I am way more in tune with the gymnastics culture than I ever would have thought I would have been as a male here in America. So from that aspect, like I have a little more insight overall from my ex-wife's perspective, and then just from kind of knowing a little bit more about it, and then having, the insight with working with the U.S. ski and snowboard team. So what I'm more concerned about with is like, what are the lessons learned here for athletes? Like what can be learned from this moment? I obviously have my opinions on what happened. I don't want to share them either way because it crosses into a couple spaces that are obviously very intimate to me. Mental health. Something might be interested to talk about was the one time I did ask for help and what happened in 2007 after I lost 9 guys in one day. And so that is a very intimate conversation for me. But so is leadership. When you are the GOAT, when you have taken that title, when you are a leader, it's like the ramifications of your actions don't just affect you. They affect many, not only on the team, but across the country, across the spaces of sport. And so what are the lessons learned from this? Because I've already talked to my daughter about this. Yesterday, we spent about 2 hours on the phone because I was concerned with how she saw this, because Simone is her idol at this point. And for her to see Simone bow out like that, which at least from the perception of everybody in the world was that she had one bad fall and she quit. But there was a lot of stuff that led up to that, of why I understand why she made the decision that she did, or at least justified it, that my daughter was like, well, if this got to Simone, then I'm like, this is going to happen to me. And so I was like, all right, honey, well, let's look at, what happened. She was confident going in. She made some statements going in. So the lesson learned to you that I hope you walk away from this is be humble, keep your mouth shut, execute, retire. Then you can write a book about this stuff. Now that's not on her. That is not my advice to her. That's not what I think of her. I'm just saying that's how I've used it towards my daughters. Now towards the athletes that I've worked with, I've told them the same thing, because, one of my nickname in the Army was Dark Horse. And because we have call signs, and like when I was a commander, my call sign was Headhunter Charlie 6. But my nickname was Dark Horse. And the reason is that a dark horse, I don't know if you're familiar with that concept, but the dark horse in a race is that horse that no one knows about, that is just kind of entered and hangs back with the pack for the first 90% of the race. And then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, the last 10% of the race.
Oh, the Katie Ledecky right
comes
there.
out of
That's
nowhere.
The Katie Ledecky.
Well, but this is the one that like no one knows about, right? Not the one that does it on purpose. Well, maybe you do it on purpose, but it's the one that keeps her mouth shut and just keeps her head down in the ground. And then the last 10% of the race comes out of nowhere, where everyone else is so tired from talking about how great they've done the first 90% of the race that they burn out the last 10%, and that dark horse takes. So that's the dark horse concept. So when you say betting on a dark horse, that's what people say. And for me, the only reason I think that title was given is I was always the only non-West Point officer in my command structure. So when I was platoon leader, I was only non-West Point, and when I was a company commander, same thing. And so with the athletes that I work with, rather than tell them what to do, because that never works out well, is I just encourage them. And I use it based off of how I did things in the Army. And the only reason why I believe I had success and got promoted the rate that I did was because I embraced that concept. And so I encourage them to kind of embrace the same thing, to say, listen, what story are you going to be more interested in reading about after everything's done? The one that did it this way, of that, kind of the shock that came out of nowhere at the end, or the one that was talking about what they're going to do and they actually happen to do it? Okay, whatever. That's the story that's more interesting. And that's what shows people what can be done if you put your head down and you just focus on doing all the little things excellent on a daily basis, in and out, that all of a sudden the results are what everyone calls success. And so with the athletes, whether it be from the professional snowboarders that I've been able to work with or the amateur, 9-year-old golfer, it's all in the same thing. Focus on doing the little things to such a ridiculously high standard of excellence that no one else cares about, and see what happens when all of a sudden they all come together and everyone else calls that success or a gold medal. And the ones that have embraced that are the ones that have moved up faster and have been sustainable.
Every single field. So we had Chef Andrew Black on, who's now one of my good friends, and he runs a very, very high-end restaurant. And he was like, we measure the distance between the fork and the knife, and everything is calculated and perfect. Everything. And my wife and I celebrated our anniversary there last week, 2 weeks ago, something like that. And it was a 10-course meal, and just, perfection in every sense of the word. And that's how my agency looks at websites. Everything we do is custom from the ground up. We don't use templates because every brand's unique. Every website should be unique to that brand. Rabbit's a little different. We just look at it as having the best customer service. Like we know that hey, it's a kiosk that runs Power Brits and it's automated and runs by an app on a network. There's going to be issues. What we can do is have live chat 24/7. Just fix anything that goes wrong. And then me personally, I have a job to be a good husband. I have a good job to be a good host. I have a good job to love my community. To me, it's all comes to loving my wife and my neighbor. If I can do those well, everything else bleeds into that.
Yep. But it's how do you love your wife? Is it that one big anniversary you do every year, or is it the little things every single day?
Yeah, exactly.
That are done exceptionally well.
I junk up the countertop, and so when I stop junking up the countertop, that actually means more to her than the 4th dozen roses I brought her for junking up the countertop.
Exactly. And so that's what it comes down to of what I tell athletes. I say, listen, while everybody else is focused on the gold medal, that's everyone else's focus. So everybody's going in that route. And the path of the dark horse is often finding the route that's less traveled because there's not as many people on there. It's you have more ability to move and experiment and be creative while everybody else is just concerned with doing what everybody else is doing. And when you can be on that path and when you can embrace being excellent at those little things, they'll amount up. That's with, with the Army Rangers. There's nothing sexy about what we do other than doing the fundamentals over and over and over until we become excellent at them. It's so the JJ writes in Un-Winnable Wars in the prologue, the comparison, where would you see a comparison between an Army Ranger and a snowboarder? And it's, and for us, it was that aspect, or him and I were able to come to was well, let's think about it. When an Army Ranger does an air assault mission, a raid to go and get the bad guys, let's look at that. So we come in on a helicopter. You guys come in on a 22-foot death drop into a curved skating rink. I said, we move up to the objective to do our explosive breach. You do your first hit in the pipe. We do the explosive breach. That sets off the fireworks. You do your first big hit. We do the firefight, kill the bad guy. You do your main big hit. We do sensitive site exploitation to find the next target. You do your cleanup hit. We got on the helicopter, leave, you exit the pipe. Dude, we basically match each other's crazy in essence. And that was the connection that we got to. So when we do that mission that I just described, which is very, very complicated, there's a lot of moving parts going on, a lot of things that can go wrong. We don't look at it as doing the air assault mission. We look at the mission as being the air assault, the breach, the raid, the sensitive site exploitation, the exfiltration. And within those missions itself, we have what's called, so those are each called mission essential tasks within the battle, the actual task itself. So underneath each of those mission essential tasks are 20 to 30 battle tasks. That's what we focus on training on, is those 20 to 30 battle tasks, day in, day out, and do those exceptionally, and they all come together. And the result is this thing. And with JJ, that was very similar to his mindset of when he went and he beat Sean in 2002 and what he helped Sean do in 06, 08, 12, or 14, he didn't do too well. And then 18, he came back and won the gold again. So that's the thing that I try to espouse onto them is focus on being excellent at the little things because no one does that. And it's not sexy. It's not popular at the time. But when you see the results and all of a sudden success becomes as natural as getting up and going to the bathroom every morning because things just come together, everyone else, wow, how did he do that?
Yeah. I often look at it as I don't want to be successful on Instagram. I want to be successful in the sense of my grandfather. got up every day. He did his
Legacy.
job. He was a veteran. Like, he served in World War II. He worked on planes overseas when he's 18 years old, working on planes for the war. And I saw like that generation doesn't complain. They don't make excuses. They just do their job. They show up. And that's my thing. Like, a guy sent me an email. He's rescheduled our meeting 4 times. And he goes, "Hey, just want to
take out that eye roll from the video in case he watches this."
He says, like, whatever, like, "Hey, I'll see you Thursday, right?" And I just wrote back, "I don't cancel meetings, period." And then I wrote, "Ever, period." Sent. Not to be a dick, not to be like, but I just wanted him to know, like, hey, when you work with me, I don't not show up. I do my job. Like, my job's to be here. I'm going to be here. Except when you showed up a few minutes before me, but
That's right. Pierre was here. He welcomed me. So I was not unwelcomed. So I did not see that. I saw that as a win. You had a backup plan, right? You might not have known the backup plan was being executed, because he's like, "I'm not getting out of my car, so I'm not standing here on the porch with you."
But I say that to say, like, yeah, it's true. The little things, and the little things is what builds a company. The little things is what adds up.
So this is kind of interesting what you bring up, like whole JJ's little revelation at the top of the half pipe at Copper Mountain of like, how the heck are we here together? Literally what he said was, "Jesse, while you were going through Ranger school, like, I was winning an Olympic medal. Like, how are we here right now?" And when you think about it, what is the difference between an Army Ranger, a Navy SEAL, a snowboarder, and you? Application. That's it. But the method is actually very similar.
When you see Tiger Woods work out, you're like, whoa.
Yeah, we're all the same. And so, like, and if you look at the mission statement of AM300, my company, it's about like more learning from other people in terms of how we do our craft, and them hopefully learning from us. It's actually
iron sharpens iron.
It's the ultimate. It's like, I believe. So another difference between the Rangers and SEALs, when you asked that earlier. So the Navy SEAls, when they go in, they're there forever, right? They're in that community. They're Navy SEAls forever. Go ahead.
I just have to ask, because I'm really confused. How did the Navy SEAls take out Bin Laden?
They were on cycle, the rotation for it. So yeah, they happened to be the ones on rotation at that time. At least that's also the JSOC commander at the time was Admiral McCraven, a Navy SEAL, because McChrystal had just moved up to take over Afghanistan. But they were on rotation. So had Delta been on rotation, they would have gotten the mission. SEAL Team 6 just happened to be on rotation, and so they got it. It was a timing thing. At least that's the standard political line.
Go back to what you're saying. I'm sorry.
But it's like, if you go back and you think, like, we're all like part of the same. So if you look at, the difference between Rangers and SEALs, like, SEALs stay stovepiped in that community forever. They never leave the SEAL community. Army Rangers, as an officer, now there's an exception of how long I spent, like, because I was active from 2003 to 2010. Usually as an officer, you only be somewhere for 2 to 3 years, then you go take a break, you go somewhere else for 2 to 3 years. Within the Rangers, you can only do 2 or 3 years as an officer there, and then you go out to the regular Army to go serve. And the idea is that you're bringing that Ranger spirit to try and bring other people into the fold, like convince them to try and go to Ranger school. And so, like, we go in and out, and it's designed that you don't have this incestuous community, but you have a chance to go outside, see the big Army, bring those lessons learned back into the Ranger Regiment or the Rangers or the Green Beret or whatever you're working in, where SEALs stay in that entire community. Rangers will go out to spread. It's like Rangers are the real liberals, right? Because we want to, like, bring it out there and then bring it back in and give it away, because we want to try and bring that, that attitude, that mindset to the bigger Army. Now, it doesn't always work, because people aren't going to always want it, and oftentimes they don't want us to come work with them because of our standards that we put on ourselves and the people that are working within us. But, coming back to, why is it that like-minded individuals can, like, get shit done? It's because we all kind of have that same mindset. As you look back, okay, yeah, my success has come from this attitude of doing the little things. Excellent. Well, how many people actually put emphasis or focus on that? Not many. It's the focus is always on when's my company going to hit this amount of money for valuation? When do I win this medal? When do I get this title? When do I get this accomplishment? It's all based off these things that, are glamorous for about 5 seconds. But if you haven't done the work, like especially with snowboarding, it's by judges. One of those guys can go in there and have one good race and be the hero just because everybody else fell or the judges were asleep while they did their tricks or whatever. But if you're doing this stuff over and over and over and over again, it's going to be a certain point where you're not going to be able to deny what the pattern of excellence is, which equals success.
Yeah. For Rabbit, we look at our path forward as far as raising funds and valuations and everything else. And we have these target goals, but they're all a subset of what we're trying to do. Like it's all about, hey, we want to launch units in these cities, this many units at this many countries during this amount of time frame. It's going to cost this much. It's going to produce this much revenue. This much revenue is going to lead us being worth this much. So I always do. I set a huge goal. How I do things is set a huge goal, and then I try to reverse engineer how to accomplish it.
And that's where the excellence has the opportunity to come in, and that's the only way that you're ever going to achieve that success is what you just described right there. And like that's what I try to help these athletes, and not only athletes, but, I've had an opportunity to work with some amazing people within the financial sector where we've done the same exact things. And they've had the same exact results. And then when a snowboarder is able to come in with me to one of those events, it just brings that much more credibility to the process. Because what you're talking about is an emphasis on the process, not the result.
Yep.
Like that's where the win comes, from doing the process to a level of excellence.
Yeah, like LinkedIn wants to celebrate when we celebrate. They don't want to celebrate when I spend, till up 3 a.m. sending emails trying to get XYZ done.
Exactly.
They actually want to comment, that's unhealthy and you need to spend more time. And
yeah, well, I'm not the best person to talk about that aspect. I mean, but that is something that I put a lot of emphasis now on. Is like, people call it self-care, and there's nothing more annoying than that. Like, what are you doing for self-care? But I mean, what a lot of people don't look at is my mornings. Like they don't see the mornings that I spend, because I do meditate now. That's, a new thing over the last 4 years. I do yoga. Like not everything I do is the hard thrashing type stuff. That's what people see, and that's what people are impressed by. But what has set the conditions for me to still be able to do that at the senior citizen AARP eligible age of 41 that I'm at now is through doing those things. And what I found was that, holy smokes, if I do take the time to do these things, especially the meditation aspect, I can be more efficient within the time that I'm allotted within the day, that all of a sudden I don't necessarily need to be up, burning the wire. I mean, sometimes, yes, there are those times where you just got to, I put on my suck it up buttercup shirt, look in the mirror and say, get after it, son, because you got to get this stuff done. Yes, there are those times, but if you can set the conditions to be more influential within the time that you have, or at least when the time people are awake, to get their stuff done, then that's where real impact, ends up coming from. So it's like both of the ends of the spectrum that we're talking about are important. It's just neither of them get any sort of recognition, either from the beginning or the end of what you're talking about.
It's winning that battle with yourself. Last night I went to bed really late, woke up at the same time I always do. And I'm like, all right, I need to work out, but I actually need to go back to bed. I need to sleep more. And then I'm looking at my schedule.
That's
and
your
I'm
weak self. That's your weak self socket.
And I'm looking at my schedule and I go, I either had to skip the workout or sleep. And I was like, and I can't skip the workout. And I'm not a guy who works out. I was just like, I'm in a good rhythm lately. And it's like, I can't break this rhythm.
I mean, habits, right? Habits that you establish is what's going to manifest. Those things you're talking about are all like doing the little things excellent.
It's just beating the self. It's beating yourself. Yeah. You versus you. All right. I want to go a really dark place in your story.
Okay. We're in a dark space. Go for it.
You've frequently mentioned the day that 9 men died under you. Yeah. I want to talk about that.
Yeah. So to back up from that, so the context with that was, so I had a chance to get out of the Army at 25. Just hit my 4 years, had my master's degree done, and I was planning to get out. When interviewed with some major companies, had some great job offers because I was essentially, because I had been given the opportunity to get my MBA, at 23, 24 years old, I was at the same place, if not ahead of a lot of my civilian peers that didn't go in the military. And so I had the best of both worlds going for me in terms of I had the military service, I had the deployments, I had the Ranger status, and I had the MBA. And as I was in the process of getting out, the general officer said, Jesse, what's the one thing that would keep you in the military? And I said, give me a command within Task Force 300, which was the unit that was being stood up at Fort Bragg. And I asked for that just because I knew it was the one thing he couldn't give me. You had to have been through the captain's career course, which I hadn't gone to. You had to have already commanded another unit for 2 years, which I had not done. And so it was an impossible thing. And I threw that out there knowing it was the one thing that he couldn't give me. And then he said, done. And so I went from planning to get out to now getting an opportunity to take command of a unit at 26 years old that I shouldn't have even had an opportunity to apply for until I was 30, 31. So all my peers that were in the unit with me were at least 30 years old. They were commanders within the other 4 troops that were in there, or companies. So I took command of that unit when I was 26 years old in Iraq, downrange. I had been a planner within the unit. I'd been a planner within the unit for about a year prior, and I'd been a lieutenant, a younger officer with all the guys that had been in the unit. And so I had never really left because it was created. They created Task Force 300 from about 20,000. They took 20,000 people at Fort Bragg and narrowed it down to 300, and they made us into a task force in 2006. So got a chance to command in it, went overseas, and I had been the planner leading up to coming into command for 6 months prior. And so I knew about this little thing called ISI, the Islamic State of Iraq, that no one knew about because we were fighting Al-Qaeda at the time. That was the thing.
If you need to take it, you can.
No, we're good. So we were fighting this thing called Al-Qaeda. There was no such thing as ISIS. But I kept seeing these things called Dala Islamia. And speaking Arabic and understanding that means Islamic State. Dala Islama Iraqi means Islamic State of Iraq. And so I was seeing these things and I was doing all the planning, but no one could prove that it was actually out there. So I go into command in January 2007. We took out Zarqawi, which is why we deployed over there in the first place in April. And then things just started getting bad. And we stayed. So deployment that was supposed to be 30 days ended up being like 18 months. It was horrible. So I ended up going into command of the unit that I was supposed to command anyway, early, because we were overseas and the other guy was scheduled to rotate out. And so I go into command, and because I had the knowledge of this from doing all the planning operations before, they sent my company of 149 guys into the Diyala River Valley first, which had not had any American forces in it at all, which is why the Islamic State of Iraq had secretly established their headquarters there. And we had taken out Zarqawi in April 2006. Prior to that, and then just left it. Okay, kill Zarqawi, let's move on. It can be a scene, an American sniper, and that's it. And so fast forward 9 months later, where they were untouched, they had all that time to build back up. And so they sent my unit in because I had the knowledge, and no one believed us. They did not think it was as bad as it was. And we went in there day one, man, and it was a full-blown like World War II type firefight. And next thing you know, we have everybody in theater coming in to support us in this mission. So at 26 years old, I went into the initial bee's nest. We stirred up, we proved it, and we established, yes, this Islamic State of Iraq is a real thing, and it might be worse than Al-Qaeda. So because we were the first ones in, we stayed. So while everybody else left, we stayed in the Diyala River Valley in like a little patrol base that we made out of a school that we took over, and starting to try and figure out everything that's going on. We're doing well. We're convincing the local populace, hey, we'll be here. We can help you guys fight them. And so we're about to continue pushing up 2 weeks later. So this was first part of March of 2007. So we're sitting there doing our plan, and my initial my senior medic had come up to me, Ben Saban, and he had told me, hey, by the way, sir, I'm getting out of the military when we get back. Just I'm done. And I'm like, dude, come on. You're like the best medic in the Army right now. Stop talking nonsense. He's like, no, sir, I'm going to come back as a missionary. I want to help these people. And I'm like, dude, like, stop. Let's talk about this later, because he was about ready to be up for promotion E7. And so the mayor came up to the village, and I said, hey, pause. Let's talk about this later. So I go in, do my little meeting with the mayor. And as I get done 5 minutes later, I go to open the door, And as I open the door, I see Ben flash and yell, "Get down," which it turns out he had yelled that twice before. That was the third time he'd yelled it. So it came out from behind a cinder block level of protection that he had as I opened the door. And that's what I heard. And I immediately turned like this to my right. And that was when I saw what looked like a nuclear bomb go off right in my face. And it turned out it was a suicide bomber that had broken through our wire, the little kind of hodgepodge wire that we had set up to protect the entrance to the little base that we were living in. And a little Toyota truck that was full of 500 pounds of explosives blew up. And I ended up getting peppered down on the left side of my body because I had turned, and Ben's body had protected the front side of my body. So all the shrapnel basically stops right here. And I've got a tattoo that covers up all those scars there, which says John 15:13, which is, there's no love greater than this, to lay down your life for your brother, which is what Ben did for me that day. And so I got hit. I was blown back, knocked out for a few seconds. My first sergeant woke me up, who had been behind me and been completely protected. And when you get hit, like a Purple Heart, there's a lot of benefits that come with that. So this guy, my first sergeant, senior non-commissioned officer, who technically works for me, but he's like 40, been in Delta Force, had seen parts of the government that I had never seen. He was a hero in our unit, but he worked for me technically. He also had like 8 kids. So I ended up protecting him and keeping him from getting his Purple Heart that day because I took all 19 pieces of shrapnel, and he never let me down about that. So I get blown back. He wakes me up, and I wake up, and it looks like my face is just hanging down. I'll see if I can find the pictures from this, but it's because the blood that was coming down, it looked like my face was hanging. And before that, he wakes me up. I wake up, I get up, I look, and there are just bodies laying everywhere from my guys, to include, and all I see Ben yelling, "Get the aid station up and running." So see him walking. So all my radios have been blown out. I've got no comms with my higher headquarters. And so I know that I've got about 60 seconds before the vehicles in my truck, which are or the radios in my truck, which are probably okay because that's up armored. It's going to take 60 seconds for those to get up. So I go flip those on, and I start just bringing bodies back to the aid station. So we ended up having 19 guys that were hit that day. As I bring the first wave of bodies back, I see Ben on the ground, completely uniform stripped off, and he's just bleeding out from everywhere on his front. And I'm like, guys, what the heck? Like, I saw Ben running, and I'm pretty sure he was the one that I heard yell, "Get down." I saw him say, "Get the aid station up and running." And they're like, "Sir, he's been hit." And so I went back, had about 30 seconds till my radios came back up. I went and got one other guy that had been blown over the wall, bring him back, radios come up, get a hold of my higher command, get assets out to come hit us. And we end up finding ourselves in the middle of a full-blown firefight with 19 guys injured, to include myself, with 19 pieces of shrapnel in me. And we end up fighting it out, get the casualties evacuated. As the helicopter was coming in, I was holding Ben, the guy that I watched flash in front of me, and who 5 minutes before he told me he was going to get out of the Army to come be a missionary and come back and help these people and try and tangibly show them God's love, which I would have never saw that from him. But that was the last thing he told me. He ended up dying in my arms right as the helicopter touched down, the medevac helicopter. So he was my first guy that I lost. So I got him out. 15 minutes later, when he got to the hospital, they called official dead on arrival. We got the other 17 guys out, and then I went back by vehicle to the next major base to get the shrapnel taken out, because I had just lost my first guy as a commander at 26 years old after having a very successful first mission as a commander, and I wasn't going to leave the fight. And so I got the shrapnel taken out. I refused pain medication, because if you take pain medication, you're down for 72 hours. They won't let you back in, at least you're supposed to. And so I refused the pain medication and just basically had all 19 pieces of shrapnel taken out by a doctor. As soon as it was done, got in a truck, and I went right back out to the fight to retake command of my company, because we just lost, our most influential medic. And so that happened March 17th, 2007. And that was like a big status check to me of like, this shit is for real. And because Ben had been a part of one of the medics that helped save my life in 2003 when my vehicle went down. And so him and I had obviously a very close relationship. And so next 2 weeks were pretty somber after that. Like, it was rough for everybody, because Ben was a leader within the organization. And so fast forward 2 weeks later, we get an opportunity to do the other Zara Cowboy mission, where we went after his brother. And Charlie Shoup, my company, ended up he ended up being in our target area. And so we got the credit with taking him down. I still have the flag at my house and the execution sword that we brought out of there. And so after that, so we did that mission, we come back and we're riding pretty high because we're like, we have just identified why this war is going as bad as it is. And so the plan was to continue pushing forward north, like deeper into the Diallo River Valley. And so we were supposed to leave in 2 days. So I go and do a lunch with the central provincial governor of the area that we were in to kind of celebrate what we had done and all this stuff and the path forward. So I go to this lunch. I take like my personal security detachment with me, my boys that protected me when I was out doing stuff, and everybody else was left back at the base. As we're coming back to the base, we're probably about 5 miles back, and all of a sudden I see what looks like one mushroom cloud explosion in the general direction of my base and a second one. And I'm like, what the heck? Try calling the base, nothing. Try calling my home base, I'm too far out. No comms, no idea, nothing. And I immediately step on it. And my vehicle, because it was a commander's vehicle, had the biggest engine in it. I ended up completely leaving my entire security detachment. And me, my driver, and my radio guy find ourselves in the middle of Iraq with no protection, just us. And they tell me, like, sir, we're completely, we just blew our PSD out, personal security detachment. I said, I don't care, keep going. I need to know what happened at the base. And when I got up there, what had happened was they had brought an initial suicide vehicle in and blew out our barriers, and then brought a dump truck with 2,000 pounds of homemade explosives in the back and launched it right on our base. And so when I got up there, my base was completely flattened. And they're obviously going after me. I wasn't there. And when I got there, several guys hit. And I said, well, that building is the building that 2nd Platoon is in. Where are they at? They said, sir, they're buried. And so we established a perimeter, initially had a pretty rough firefight. Once we got in, we neutralized that. And then at that point, it was just digging. And so for about 8 hours, we dug before we even got to the first body. And he was obviously gone. And by the time everything was said and done, 9 guys were trapped under there and had died that day, 2 days before we were supposed to move on. We thought we had neutralized things. So at that point, like 2 months into command, like I've now had the biggest loss of life of any company commander in theater since the start of the war, I believe, since Vietnam. And I'm like, my head is just spinning. And so we were given the opportunity to be pulled off the line, because at this point we lost 10 of the 149 guys in our command. And I think 30 of us had received Purple Hearts at this point. So that's like, that takes usually a company out of combat effectiveness. So the task force commander gave me the opportunity to pull out. And I went to my boys, and usually the military or the army is not a democratic thing at all. It's kind of like, all right, here's a mission, you go, you do. But I gave the boys an opportunity to quit. And I said, guys, you're giving us an opportunity to come back and let somebody else come out here and finish this fight. I think we should stay. And everybody voted to stay. And that was when I knew that I was serving with 149 of the finest Americans that I would ever get a chance to serve with. And so we stayed in that village that we were in to establish or to continue basing our operations. But at that point, like, I could not sleep. Like, I was so on edge about losing another guy that I thought my heart was going to explode. And so my doctor, who is a good friend of mine, delivered Addison. His name's not important for purposes, but he came out, and I'm like, we'll just call him Bob. I say, hey, Bob, I need to talk to someone. Like, I'm the youngest commander in theater, and I just suffered the largest loss of life since Vietnam. Like, I need to talk to somebody. And he told me flat out, he said, Jesse, if you talk to anybody, you're going to lose your command, you'll lose your security clearance, and you'll never lead Rangers again. And I said, okay, well, what do I do? Like, my heart literally feels like it's going to explode. And he said, here you go. And he gave me a bottle of pills, and those pills turned out to be Xanax. And at the time, I had no idea like what that drug did. All I knew is that it stopped my heart from feeling like it was going to explode. Now that drug, you're only supposed to take, I think, 6 milligrams a day. And if you take 6 milligrams a day for 7 straight days, you are physically addicted to the point that if that drug is taken away from you, that drug and alcohol are the only two things that can actually kill you while you're detoxing from it, because it makes you go into a status called DT, Dorilium trilliums. Cocaine, all those other drugs will not kill you. To come off it is, I'm sure, sucks, but it will not kill you. Alcohol and benzodiazepines, which Xanax falls into, will kill you. So through that deployment, I was on upwards of probably 20 milligrams a day just to get through that deployment. So I had never drank up until that point. And when I got back, and I ended up losing 4 additional guys after that as well. So the total loss of life from our unit was 14. From the task force, total was 22. So I have a task force of 300. We lost 22. Out of my part, 149, we lost 14. Like, the only thing that I could do, because I wasn't going to quit. Like, I was not going to quit on my guys, and I was not going to claim mental health reasons in order to take care of myself, which in reality, I probably should have, like, looking back on it. But I did what I needed to do because they did what I needed them to do. And the results of that deployment was a 2-year early promotion to major without any of the requirements that I was supposed to have in order to be eligible for the promotion to begin with. So the results of that deployment ended up getting me promoted early. And the feeling that I was struggling with inside at the time was my success that I'm experiencing right now as the youngest major in the Army at this point, beating all those West Pointers, being the dark horse, was 14 guys had to die. 14 are now amputees, and 49 of us are awarded Purple Hearts, meaning that we had bullets or shrapnel go in our body during combat situations, and who knows how many of them suffering from PTSD. And yet I could not admit that I was suffering from that. And so when I got back, like, I never drank up until that point. I don't know why. I think it was just a point of pride and, like, control, whatever. But as soon as I had that first drink, I realized that it gave me the same effects as the Xanax did. And so I was like, okay, I have found the secret to being able to maintain this speed that I'm going at right now. Drink at night, take the drugs prescribed to me during the day. And so from 2007 on, that was basically my motive and how I stayed in the fight. And the only thing that stopped it was having my 4th reconstructive knee surgery in 2011. And after that, they were worried that if I had another bad jump or another bad situation in combat, they were going to have to amputate my leg. And so that was the repercussions of what happened. But after that deployment, we went on several more, did not lose another guy, did not have a single Purple Heart, still had more missions than anyone. But I became absolutely obsessed with training. My guys never saw their families when we were home because we were always out training. And because we had met the training standards before anyone else, we were the first ones eligible for deployments. And so we went on more deployments. And the reward was, early promotions and awards that look flashy on a uniform. And
I heard the statement that the reward for good work is more work.
Yes, that's definitely the truth. So, that doctor ended up getting out of the Army, not over just me, but because he had been essentially forced to do that. He ended up getting out of the Army over that. And so it was a big problem. I can't attest to whether it is still or not. I know that if you say you have PTSD and you get labeled with it, you'll lose your security clearance immediately. That's still,
So was it a good thing what he did or a bad thing ultimately?
Well, ultimately it got me to where I am now. And so it's all been part of my process, and I've learned to embrace that. From a sustainable standpoint, did
he run a lot of lives by doing that? Or did he see that you were somebody special?
He was doing what he thought he needed to do in order to keep us in the fight, because he knew that I didn't want to be taken out of the fight either. And he knew that the psychological repercussions for me of being taken out of the fight possibly could be worse than leaving me in. But it did lead me to the point there where, the first time that I had a drink, I was full-blown alcoholic. And, it wasn't until 2017 until the number of suicides matched the number that we lost during that deployment where I finally sat back and was like, okay, I need to do something about this. And the result of doing that something, started at the lowest rated VA recovery center in the country as, a young retired ranger guy that was CEO of a tech company that was, had developed a technology to track every single soldier on the battlefield, humbling himself and walking into a VA and saying I needed help. And that's where the Phoenix Project began.
So let's dive into the Phoenix Project.
After a short break. So where the Phoenix Project began.
Yeah.
That was kind of where we're at. So in 2011 is when I had the final knee surgery and I woke up out of that and they're like, dude, your career's over. So like literally overnight. And like, you want to talk about traumatic things, like in December 2011, shortly after Camille was born, like I thought I was going to do 40 years in the military. At the time I'd been hired to be General Castle's aide, who was the commander of Iraq. At the time, like I had everything set up for me and I went into that
last. Were you on a path to be like a General Petraeus, which means like as high as like a general essentially?
And so when a commander of that level picks you to be their aide, and he was authorized an aide, there's a lieutenant colonel post battalion command. It's like 10 years ahead of me. So him picking me for that job was huge. And that was, his stamp to be able to tell the Army, hey, I am putting my general status behind Jesse, that he is going to be one of the future leaders of the military. So at that point I was in the best possible spot. So in terms of would I have done anything differently in terms of the drugs I took, what I did to stay in the fight, I would have told you, heck no, because I was in the best possible spot, like a spot that I could not even have imagined being in. And then when that fourth reconstructive surgery came in, it all just came crashing down. And they said, nope, you're done. And then overnight I was medically retired. So I come into the civilian world and of course, struggling with, quietly struggling with PTSD and not knowing it. But I kept going. And at this point I was probably drinking over a fifth of Jack Daniels a day. And that's a conservative amount just to stay functional. And I don't like that term, like functional alcoholic, but for me, like I never passed out from drinking. I didn't drink to get drunk. For me, it was like a performance enhancing drug. It allowed me to slow down just enough that I could get stuff done and be productive. And so no one was ever going to say anything to me about it because I produced. And you're not going to kill your golden egg, by fixing something that wasn't broke. So fast forward to 2016, I start AM300. Things are going really well. My ex-wife now files for divorce. Lots of money was at stake at the time. And the alcohol consumption got higher and higher. And at this point, fast forward to now April 2017, that was when the number of suicides from our unit or from guys that I served with matched the number that we lost. And as I look back on every single one of them, there was one thing consistent with all of them. And it was that they all had copious amounts of alcohol in their system when they did it. And so I was noticing a pattern and I knew that I wasn't above it. And if this could happen to these guys, it could definitely happen to me. And so I knew I needed to do something about it. So I initially tried to go to the VA and, with the VA, at least at the time, and perhaps things are different. But once you admit you have a problem, and for me, I wasn't willing to say that I was an alcoholic or that I was suffering from PTSD or any of that stuff. I just knew something. I was in the behavior pattern that several others that I respected the hell out of and thought in many ways were better men than me had succumbed and become a statistic of, on average, 22 veterans a day that sadly kill themselves, which for whatever reason still is not going down. Those numbers are still the same, which is super sad and super pathetic. And that's part of my dissertation of what I'm attacking at Baylor while I'm there, is addressing that. So I went to the VA and I very quickly realized that, hey, if you admit that you have a problem, you're stuck within them. And so I did not do well with being told what to do, believe it or not. This is in 2017. And I realized that when I would go in, and to back up with the US ski and snowboard and how it came to that they built their first ever wheelchair ramp out there, which I think was 2015 or 16, the first time I came out there to speak to the rookie camp. Like I would always go in and talk to the athletes about, now keep in mind, I'm coming in there with a fifth of Jack in my system, which I have talked to them about and have told them, hey, this was not okay. And I wish I could change that. But I would go in there, with a blood alcohol content probably of around 0.30 and just do workouts with them. Because the mental way wasn't going to be enough for me. Like the VA telling me what to do about PTSD and the methods that I chose to cope with it, because alcohol wasn't the problem. Alcohol was a solution for me at the time. It was what allowed me to continue functioning, allowed me to continue making money, allowed me to continue to perform for people. So when I would go in there and talk to them, I'd say, listen, life is on 4 planes of existence: the mental, the emotional, the physical, and the spiritual. I said, I can safely say that when I was an Army Ranger, and even now to this point, well, I wouldn't say now, but like the physical plane was all I cared about. As long as I was the most physically fit person, I was going to be okay. I did not care about the mental. I did not care about the emotional. And I still feel bad to this day that the spiritual held the lower level that it did compared to the physical because of my own personal faith. So I would tell them, like, listen, when I had that 4th reconstructive knee surgery and my physical was taken away from me, like that took away everything. And so the lesson learned here is you guys as professional athletes, make sure that you're more balanced on the mental, emotional, physical, and spiritual, so you don't end up in the same place I do, because it's not a matter of if you get injured, it's when you get injured. And you'll be able to bounce back rather than be where I was. So it's the ultimate say as I do, or do what I say, not as I do type thing. And I realized it, and I did feel guilt. So, but I just knew the mental way was not going to work for me. The VA telling me how to deal with PTSD or my choices of dealing with it was not going to work. The emotional way, which I would say, the emotional methods to be out there would be like 12-step programs. Like I wasn't a fan of going into a room and saying, I'm messed up and I'm just like all of you. That wasn't going to work for me. The emotional way. The physical way, I could get away with drinking a 5th of Jack and going in and working out with professional athletes. So that wasn't enough, which probably did a lot more damage than it did help, but it was what it was. And like I said, the spiritual way I still feel bad about. So I knew that I had to come up with something creative where I could figure out a way to make the mental work for me, to make the emotional work for me, physical work for me, the spiritual work for me, that I could take to get myself out of this situation I was in with the VA now and ultimately save myself. And so I finally got to a point in May when the suicide numbers reached that I was worried. And I said, I need to be able to get space to take a knee and figure out what the hell is going on with me. And so I, of course, tried to look and see what 30-day programs were available, and there was like nothing except for what was considered the lowest rated VA in the country, which literally had a success rate of, I think, 0.25%. And they stopped tracking people after 6 months. So the 0.25% was probably a little high. So I ended up going out there.
Wait, so you're saying 1/4 of 1%?
Yes, correct. 1/4 of 1% was the success rate. And when I went in there, let's just put it this way, I was the only person that was there for the first time. There was someone that had been to recovery 8 times when I went there. So I go in, and as soon as I get there, I'm told, wow, you're the first Army Ranger or special ops guy that we've ever had step foot into our recovery program. I'm like, I'm not here for recovery. Thank you very much. Like, you're also the highest ranking person that's ever been here. And I finally got frustrated, and I said, listen, I'm not here to be a poster child for someone. I'm here to try and get some space and figure out what the is going on inside that's causing my guys to do these things and try and fix it. And so I think they kind of got scared of me and they locked me into a room. And so I get locked in this room waiting to see my therapist. And this is a full-blown 30-day program. So there's like locked doors, all this stuff. So to be locked inside a locked facility is when you should probably start taking things seriously, right? And you realize maybe I got myself in the wrong situation here of trying to take this knee. So I found myself in this room about this size, and there was a whiteboard in there with markers. It was like a classroom of some sort. And so I'm sitting there for about 30 minutes. No one's coming to get me. And I'm like, I'm going to be here for a while. So I have this blank whiteboard, and I walk up to it, and I'm like, I've got to start figuring this out because I think I'm stuck in a situation that could get a lot worse. Because if people start putting permanent stuff in your medical files, like that's hard to walk back from. So think about, okay, what have I talked about to people? of like how to do things, of how to succeed or come back. I'm like, oh yeah, U.S. Olympic ski, U.S. Olympic ski and snowboard team.
Okay, my own advice.
Yeah. So I literally write up on that board, mental, emotional, physical, and spiritual on 4 different colors. And I start writing all the resources that I have available for me on the mental plane. I mean, just start writing TRICARE, VA, private insurance, blah, 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 blah. Go through the emotional, go through the physical, Jim Jones, CrossFit, still physically, healthy, blah, blah, blah. Start writing all this stuff down. And then for the spiritual, write down all the stuff I have in the spiritual path. So after 3 hours or so of writing, this board is full. And I've got in front of me what I think, holy crap, this might be the key back, is what I have on this board. I just need to figure out, it's not about fighting the mental way or the VA. It's not about fighting the emotional or the 12-step way or fighting the physical or fighting the spiritual. It's about figuring out a way to make them work for you. But as I'm doing this, I'm holding up my hand like this, covering up one of the planes of existence that I could not write one single resource under. You guess what plane of existence that was? The emotional. I had perfected the art of isolating myself since I was that 10-year-old boy, when I realized the only way that I could ever truly protect myself from my stepdad was to isolate. And then once I realized that when I was in a unit where I was around a bunch of West Pointers that I didn't fit in with, if I could just isolate and keep everybody at arm's length, then I could protect myself from anything that would ever come from behind my back that I couldn't protect from. And so over the course of 37 years, I got into a point where I could not write down one resource that I had on the emotional plane of existence. So I'm sitting there looking at it. I'm like, well, the only thing that I hate more than alcohol or PTSD or the VA or anything is white space on a calendar or a whiteboard. I got to write something. And so I sat there and just stared at that board, and I would not put the marker down until I wrote something. And so I remember thinking, as I came in, guys were complaining about having to go to 12-step groups every night while we were in there. And so I'm like, all right, what if I go to these 12-step groups and I find one person that is just so off the rocker, and I just be their friend for that one night and be there for them. And I've got 30 nights, so that'll be the emotional plane. So I went up there and I wrote 12 steps groups as a one thing. So it wasn't empty. And as soon as I did that, man, I had never done LSD or any psychedelic drugs or anything like that, but I can tell you that I had what can only be described as a psychedelic vision of all of a sudden being removed from that hospital and watching in real time all the things that I considered to be success in my life. Finishing as a 3-sport varsity athlete in high school, getting accepted into schools that I wanted to, becoming a ranger, becoming the youngest major in the Army, getting the MBAs, all this stuff that we would have on a resume that we'd be proud of and that defined me, I watched go up like it was a movie in 4K. And at the same time, I'm watching this bird, which was a phoenix bird, which I had always been intrigued with that concept of the phoenix. I had taken a Greek mythology class or something in undergrad, where I remembered that story of the phoenix, as soon as it reached its culmination of life, it would burst into a ball of flames, come down to the ground, and then out of the ashes of good would come something better, and it would continue this process until it reached perfection, and then it would go on to the next life. So I'm watching this phoenix bird come up as I'm watching all my accomplishments come up, and I'm like, what the heck is going on? Like, what did they give me before I went into this room? And all of a sudden, after I watched my patent be approved for my company, all of a sudden that phoenix bird blew up into a ball of fire and engulfed all of those accomplishments, and everything burned up right in front of me, everything that I considered important to me in my life. And I watched it all burn down to the ground. And I sat there, and for the first time in my entire life, like, I will say, yes, I suffered from anxiety. Like, the thought of that I could lose 9 guys in one single day kept me on edge for pretty much in my entire life. But I'd never experienced any sort of depression. For the first time in my life, as I watched all those things that I held important to me burn down to the ground, I was all of a sudden depressed for the first time in my life. And it was the most hopeless feeling that I ever had. And I all of a sudden realized this is where all those guys were. It got to the point that they could go from being one of the baddest ass rangers in the world to becoming a statistic. This is how they did it. Then all of a sudden I started seeing those ashes start moving. And out of those ashes of my accomplishments came a new phoenix bird. And I watched that thing fly up in front of me, and he'd basically look back at me and say, well, are you coming or not? And that was when I realized if I wanted to save anyone, I had to start with myself and allow all of those past accomplishments to burn down to the ground and come back across the mental, the emotional, physical, and the spiritual. And so for 30 days, I went out and I made one friend every night. And I can honestly say that other than maybe one or two people in my life, those are my first 30 friends, and all guys and girls that I still have in this phone to this day. And that was how the Phoenix Project started. So that was summer 2017, made a commitment, no more alcohol, cut off all the VA medications that they were giving me that were mind altering or any sort. And since then, have been living life across all four of those planes of existence.
So what exactly does the Phoenix Project do?
So for me, the mission statement of AM300 was to develop, collaborate, and deliver hard-fought wisdom for winning in life across all spectrums of existence, the mental, emotional, physical, and spiritual planes of existence in order to win. So not just to feel better about yourself, not to be a nicer person, but to win in whatever your aspect of life was. And for exit criteria, which you have to put in a business plan if you want to get any bank to take you seriously, is I said, this company is determined as successful and is eligible for sale if just one person is saved from this, even if that one person is just me. So the Phoenix Project was never about trying to go consult for world-class athletes or bankers or, whatever. It was about simply a safety guard for myself of coming back. And once the first time, so how this ended up going to helping other people. Is that what you're...
Yeah, so I guess what's the difference between AM300 and the Phoenix Project?
So the Phoenix Project is part of AM300. Okay. So AM300 is, the name of AM300, so my unit was called Task Force 300. That was classified at the time. So the AM300, the name, was based off of Task Force 300, which I started a nonprofit called the American 300, which was to provide scholarships for the 16 kids that were left behind without fathers from my unit. We closed that out in 2014, and all those kids have scholarships now. So the AM300 was just a shortened down version from the American 300, because the American 300, I ended up partnering with someone to help me close out the scholarships, and they're still running their organization.
Oh, cool.
Which I have nothing to do with now. My only intent was to get scholarships to kids because I thought if I could just get the scholarships, like I would stop feeling the pain. And the day that we raised the final amount where it hit the 2.9 million, you know how much better I felt the next day? Zero, exactly. So the AM300 is just, that's where that comes from.
Okay.
So the Phoenix Project is the book. And so that came about from when Ted came to me after I did my speech at the U.S. Olympic Partner Summit. How did
you get that speech?
Which one?
How did you get the opportunity to do that? The Olympic one.
The Olympic one. So I had already been working with him. And so...
How'd you start working with him?
So I started in 2015 with coming to do the rookie camps because they wanted to find, for whatever reason, their criteria was find a former special ops guy that has a valorous medal, meaning Medal of Honor, Silver Star, or Bronze Star with Valor, and it has a Purple Heart. They can come out and speak to our rookies about service. For whatever reason, when they did the Google search, somehow they found me. And so they reached out to me and called me and said, hey, would you like to come out and speak to our rookies about resilience and all this stuff? So that was literally, and this was 2015, 2 years before the Phoenix Project started. So I would go out there every summer and speak to their rookies. And that was how I started. So fast forward to, so I went to do that 30-day program initially. And that was, while I was there, I realized that alcohol, PTSD were not actually the problems. Like I needed to get down to what the problem actually was with me. And so I got an opportunity to go up to a 90-day program up in Wyoming off the grid, which is where I was able to finally find out what the problem was. So while I was up there, no one knew I was there except I think my father and my ex-wife. And somehow about a month into it, and if you go look this up timeline-wise, you'll see what I'm talking about. But in November 2017, President Trump and Lindsey Vonn got into a little Twitter battle. And next thing you know...
I believe you're saying that.
It's the two of them got in a Twitter battle, and he was like threatening her. Like, I hope you break your neck next time you fall. Because Lindsey had a reputation, or when she was active, she would get hurt a lot because she races on the edge of life. And so she would get hurt a lot. And so they got in some Twitter battle about women's rights, and President Trump said something to the fact of like, I hope you go out and break your neck next time. And so Lindsay was not doing well. She lost like 7 World Cups in a row, which she had never done. And for whatever reason, I remember at one point I gave the rookies a speech about how I take my oath from the office of the President of the United States, which if you come to my house, you'll see my original oath that I took hanging on the wall, and you'll see that it comes directly from the office of the President of the United States as officers. And so in their mind, U.S. Ski and Snowboard thought, well, one of our top athletes is having a battle with the President of the United States. Who do we know that has some sort of connection to the president that could help us out? I was the only one that they could think of. And so literally they tracked me down in this 90-day recovery program, somehow called the VA informational line. I said, hey, is there a guy there named Jesse Stewart? He's a retired major. He like does these motivational talks, blah, blah, blah. Like, well, we can't admit if there's a patient here named that. Like
that's good enough for us to take a jet there.
Well, so someone comes in and asks me like, hey, Jesse, someone called. We're pretty sure it's a prank call. He's the CEO of U.S. Ski and Snowboard, and some guy claiming to be the chief of sport. And I said, oh, Tiger Shaw and Luke Bonestein? They're like, yeah. They're like, this is for real? I said, yeah, I know them. What's up? They're like, they're looking for you. They say they have an emergency situation. And I said, okay. So I step out of the class I'm in, call them, because this place is a little more lax. So I call them. I'm like, hey, Luke, what's up, man? What's up, Tiger? They're like, hey, Jesse, by the way, we heard you're finally taking an opportunity to take a knee for yourself. And man, we're so proud of you. And the fact that you've like been able, we're always kind of wondering how you were able to live through all this stuff. And I'm like, okay, what's your point? Like, why are you guys calling me right now? Because I had no idea this was going on. Like, I'm focusing on myself. And so they tell me what happened to Lindsay and the president. And they're like, so we're wondering if you could help us. I'm like, well, what do you want me to do? Like, do you think I have a direct line to the president of the United States? Something like, well, do you? I said, no, of course not. And so I'm sitting here like, in what world? I'm a messed up vet at this point in recovery. In what world am I asked to help a professional athlete and the president of the United States solve a Twitter battle while I'm in the middle of recovery? I don't know, but hey, it sounds like fun. Let's do it. So I asked the person that was in charge of the VA if I could have a couple of days. And so I worked with U.S. Ski and Snowboard team remotely for a PR plan to help Lindsay out and kind of help diffuse the situation. I did not have any direct contact with the president. So we did that. And she won the next race. And so I guess in U.S. Ski and Snowboard's mind, I had some sort of secret sauce that helped out their top athlete, which for the record, I don't think I did at all. I just like helped her put it in perspective and I would tell her, I said, listen, it doesn't matter who the president is. I take my oath of office to the office of the president. So I go fight for whoever it is, no matter what. When you're riding on that Olympic stage, you're riding for America. You're not riding for President Trump. You're riding for the office of the president, the American people. Like, take that out of the equation, this guy. And she came back and she was fine the next day. And so fast forward to post-Olympic summit, they asked her like, hey, well, you did a great job with this whole Lindsey Vonn situation, and we've never been able to publicly acknowledge that you did that, which I didn't want any acknowledgement. But what would you think about coming to be our keynote speaker for the post-Olympic summit in front of all of our sponsors, all of our donors, and our board? Yeah, sure. Why not? I'm less than a year out of recovery of this thing. Why not go do that? And so
I have business cards. All right, I'm good to go.
So I'd already started the idea of AM300. I knew that I wanted to share this with people because I knew there were other people out there suffering, not just in the military, but outside of the military, that if they heard this stuff, and keeping this in mind, I don't have an Instagram account at this point. I don't have a dang Facebook account. I think I had a LinkedIn account. That was it. And so I went in there and I spoke to their donor board. And I think I still have the video from it because I don't remember it being necessarily that good of a speech, but I basically knew that most of the donors, because they were down in funding because they had gotten their butts handed to them at the Olympics. And I knew that most of their donors were there. And so I also knew that their donors fell a little bit more on the
No, you're good. You're good.
The kind of the more left side of politics. And so, of course, the whole thing is make America great. The mantra is, I knew that most of them probably weren't super high on the president. So I went in and said, hey, if you guys, the facts are that 75% of the Olympic medals from the United States this last Winter Olympics, even though we didn't meet the standards of what we should have, came from this team. why would you not invest in the one organization out of 22 that won 75% of the hardware? I said, so if you truly want to make America great again, you'll invest in these athletes. Drop the mic. And I walked off, and Tiger Shaw and Luke Bonestar are like hugging me. They're like, you said the one thing that we couldn't say. And so I guess they ended up raising the funds they needed. And then next thing you know, I was appointed as their chairman of their military advisory board for U.S. Ski and Snowboard. Ted asked me to come out, and that was also the first time that I ever shared my entire story in public. And I only did it to try and get SAP and sorry for me to pay for these athletes, because athletes that I developed a relationship over the last few years that stuck by me when I was that lost vet, but for whatever reason, maybe they thought I was just entertaining, still stuck by me. And when I was at arguably the lowest point of my professional life, they called out asking for my help. And so that was when I realized, wow, me being able to be of service to these Olympic athletes is a big driver of what brought me to this point where I have the ability to share this story with people. And so I did. And so there was someone from TED that was there at that partner summit. And so then they invited me to come down to the TED Talk, which was called the Phoenix Project. And shortly after that was when I signed the book deal, and then got the Instagram account and the Facebook account. And, you know, it's funny you say about how you don't care about the Instagram thing, but man, I have got, if you look in my Instagram account, I've got probably over 400 messages from people that have reached out to me and said, hey man, like
Instagram's the best, by the way. I was just saying that like,
no, I get it.
My grandfather did is way cooler than me looking cool on Instagram.
And listen, man, this Instagram account, I know that could go away tomorrow. I'm super grateful for this because I don't find myself that interesting. But man, 400 messages I have in there about people from across, athletes to normal people to veterans to special ops guys that have come into recovery through the Phoenix Project and the principles that I've been able to outline and codify, through the book, and then now through going through Baylor. And so that's where that relationship came from. So I think we've gone down about 12 rabbit holes right now.
Just 20 more to go. Okay. There's a lot of directions I can go from here. I kind of want to go, when we talk about, I kind of want to go back to the dark of like suicide bombers and so I've tried a lot to understand Islam. And so I understand it's coat hangers. You can do whatever you want. I understand there's like Sunni and Shiite, and one's more radical than the other. And
you're ahead of where President Bush was in January 2004 in terms of your knowledge base. Honestly, and I'm not saying everybody. Like the only uniqueness that I had in that point as a young lieutenant was I did understand those things.
But I guess my thing is how did you struggle with seeing people blow up buildings for Allah and seeing people stand against that also for Allah?
So that's a good point you bring up. All right, so let's talk about
that mic to be right.
Yeah, so let's talk about.
Just bring it up if it's not. What I'm saying is, like, I know it's laying.
It's all right. We'll make it work. So let's talk about the ones. Let's talk about the. I'm only going to speak from the suicide bombers that directly went after me and my boys. Okay, so those 3 suicide bombers, all 3 of them were locked into vehicles. Their families were taken hostage, and they were told, if you don't go drive this car into that base, we're going to execute your family. They did not do it for Allah. They were tortured in order to do it. And from what I understand, over 95% of the suicide bombers in Iraq and Afghanistan were in the same exact conditions. So the people actually blowing us up on it were not the terrorists themselves. It was them taking families hostage. So up until then, when I knew, because unfortunately the only way I knew this is I saw the video of my base being hit when I was hit. And I watched it, I get in the car, I watched them weld it shut, and I watched them show them the remote control trigger saying, if you don't blow this up, we're going to blow you up anyway, and we're going to kill your family. But as long as you do this, we'll take care of your family, and your family will be taken care of. Most of the suicide bombers are in that manner. The ones that happened on 9/11 were an anomaly. I have had the opportunity to get to know a lot of people of the Muslim faith. The person that helps manage my social media for me, Sonia Khilji, she is a Pakistani Muslim woman, much younger than me. And I have a lot of friends that I've spoken to about this. Most of the suicide bombers out there were not doing it for Allah. They were doing it to make sure that their families weren't murdered in the same way that they were trying to murder us. And those are just facts.
And so when we back that up, when people are, who are the people that are setting them up to do that, doing that for Allah, or are they?
So if you look, so I told you about that video that I may or may not have, which we can sit there and watch. We went after that target. He had 6 suicide bombers on the outside of his compound to protect him. He didn't have a vest on. Like, the leaders aren't,
the thing is do these leaders have a sick interpretation of Islam?
I believe they do.
Or are they just gang leaders and Islam's easy to throw it on?
Yeah, it's convenient, right? I mean, we've seen it throughout history. It's just, where the Christian faith has been used in similar matters, not necessarily with the suicide action, but it's been used to justify some pretty vicious stuff. The Islamophobia is the recent one that has just been brought to light. So as far as the assessment, yes. Gang leaders, I mean, look at bin Laden. Look where we found him. Dude, he was hiding in Pakistan 2 blocks away from the equivalent of their West Point. That was where we found him. I mean, he was hiding. He wasn't leading. So yes, I do believe that the way you just described it, gang leaders that have a convenient method through Islam, for the most part, were what we were fighting against. Were there ones that were full-blown believers of the jihad that has been kind of manifested? I never met any of them. I know all the ones that we caught, they were just cowards, and as soon as that protection was taken away from them, they gave themselves up. I only know of one guy that, like a leader, that had a suicide vest on him and blew himself up. Only one on the missions that I was on in 9 years of deploying at least once every single year. It's not common.
Do you think they're able to spread this because to read the Quran outside of Arabic is considered a sin? So therefore, most of them are uneducated in what the Quran says and of its teachings. So they learn from leaders, and the leaders have just misled them, and that has led down this path.
So I'm not an expert on those things, but from an assessment of just being on the ground, I'd say that's a big part of it. I mean, sadly, a lot of people in the Middle East, they're not educated, and so they are susceptible to that. But I think ultimately it comes down to people wanting power and finding convenient ways to use it through whatever that is available at their hands. And I think that's probably more of what it was than people that had a genuine belief in it. I mean, even bin Laden, I think if he had a genuine belief in it, we wouldn't have found him the way that he did, or that we did.
Yeah.
Which I know is hard to, it's hard to reconcile with that, because listen, man, everything that we've been told since 2000, well, not even 2001, but really back to the Cobalt Towers in 96, 97, is that it's this is Islamic extremism. Now, is it out there? Yes. But is there Christian extremism out there? Yes. Is there atheist extremism out there? Yes.
So is the question, because when you look at like a extremist Christian, somebody who like really takes the Bible literally.
That's not what I would consider an extremist Christian.
And but I'm saying when I see people that take every word of the Bible and take it literally, it's like they just love people better. They just are more servanthood.
And I think you would find that with people that look at the Quran the same way.
Okay.
I think you would, in fact, I just, so for Baylor, I had to do this interview of somebody completely different than me. And I had to make an assessment, and the whole point of it, honestly, was to try and get the white people to go interview an African American to realize that this, the person that had us do it, it was tied to the 16 87 Project or whatever that is for the New York Times, the critical race theory and all that stuff, which is one of the most misunderstood terms in our country right now, by the way. So we're supposed to, so what did I pick? I picked a Pakistani man that was Muslim for my person, because it was like defined as opposite as Jew. Because I'll tell you, like, yeah, there are not a lot of black rangers or SEALs, but some of the guys that I work out with, they're African American. We have a lot more in common than I do with most people. So why would I pick someone that all we're going to do is end up turning into a pissing contest where we're going to go work out anyway, right? And so I picked this person, and it's interesting talking to him, because he'll even tell me, like, just, you understand that, like we have to respect you, because with Islam, I know one of the big tenets of it is respecting faiths that came before it. And so he went on and told me this about how, like, I can't look at you as, and his wife is Catholic, and he has to honor that and support her based off of what the Quran says. And this is a man that does take it literally. So when you talk about the extreme, I don't tie an extremist as someone that takes the Quran to be literal, because the other thing about Arabic is a lot more complex language than English is. There's a lot of ways to interpret certain parts of the Quran, especially when it's translated to English, where you're kind of dumbing down a language.
So they've said that, like, the word Islam means to submit. Is that correct?
I don't ever recall, like, through all my times in Arabic, I don't ever remember that definition. But even if it is, to submit is to follow, right? Well, what is Christian? To follow, Jesus. Yeah. And so, we're literally splitting hairs that like PhDs normally would, but I understand why you're doing it. And here's the bottom line. You talked earlier about your most important thing is to be a good husband and to be a good neighbor. Me too. So if I want to be a good neighbor to someone of a different faith than me, regardless whether it's Islam, whether it's Sikhism, whether it's, a different sect of like Mormonism or something like that, if I try to meet them where they are and find commonalities, guarantee you that I will get to that love my neighbor and get along with my neighbor a lot faster than if I try to find, the split hairs over what the definitions and stuff are. And, what I found is we all have an opportunity for everything that we go into, of whether to find common ground or to find something we disagree with. And I guarantee you that I'm probably an expert in finding things to disagree with better than most people, because I told you earlier that alcohol and PTSD wasn't necessarily what I was recovering or what I needed to recover from or save from. And through my journey in the Phoenix Project, that's what I found. And that problem that I was suffering from was what kept me from actually living out what I try to do now. And that's, I think, an important thing to come back with is, what was that thing? Like, because something was driving me to drink over a fifth of Jack a day. Something was driving me to have these nightmares of losing 9 guys, or losing Ben, or losing Joanne Duran, or losing Sergeant Kurtz, or all those guys. What was it? And I assumed it was alcohol at first, because that's what everyone at the VA was telling me. If you just stop drinking, you'll stop being a problem. And then when I removed alcohol and realized that, hey, the pain is still here, well, it must be PTSD, because I went through all these things that I just went through to you. And in addition to that, like, think about trauma and what is actually really affecting veterans. And one of the aspects that I'm writing about at Baylor, and I think why they're actually even tolerating me at this point, because I've already caused more problems than they want to admit, there is that I believe that African Americans may have actually found the solution to dealing with PTSD that we've never known about. And that's because of this. If you think about what causes a soldier to have PTSD, is it the 9 guys that I lost in one day? Is it the 14 that I lost in one deployment? Or is it the fact that in April of 2006, when I went on that deployment, the one that was really bad, at 11 o'clock that night, because keep in mind this is before I've had kids, I'm building a baby crib. Try and show my wife that I do actually want to have a family, and that being a ranger isn't what I identify and brand myself with. I want to be a father and I want to be a husband. So I'm building a baby crib at 11 o'clock at night for a baby that hasn't even been conceived yet, by a wife that's still on birth control. That's like, I don't know if I want to have a kid with you yet. So I'm doing this at 11 o'clock at night in April of 2006. I go to bed at 1 o'clock in the morning. 2 o'clock in the morning, my pager goes off. I'm on an airplane 2 hours later to the Middle East, direct flight from Fort Bragg to Baghdad International Airport. 16 hours later, I'm on the ground. 2 hours later, I'm in a convoy where I get in a firefight. So in a 24-hour period, I went from a point where I was building a dang baby crib to being in a firefight where men were killed that were considered terrorists, that I was awarded and promoted for an action that had I done it 24 hours prior, I'd probably be in prison for some sort of manslaughter. So that change that I had to make, that I didn't do once, but did 14 times, that back and forth is something that is, that is the trauma, I think, that most of us suffer from. Because when I came back, and then, oh, by the way, 18 months later when I come back, my last mission I came to go to the airport, I was hit by 4 IEDs going to the dang airport. We didn't even stop to fight the fight. I just wanted to get on the dang airplane. I'm pretty sure that Humvee is still at Baghdad International Airport. I got on that plane, direct flight from Baghdad back to Fort Bragg. So less than 24 hours, I'm back in my wife's arms, giving her a hug, and being awarded and giving my Bronze Star of Valor for actions that, had I done them at that moment in time, I'd probably be in prison for manslaughter. So that struggle back and forth between these worlds. So there's I'm blanking right now on the concept of what it's called, but code switching. So there's a thing called code switching. And Pierre, I don't know if you're familiar with that concept or not, but it's a codified concept that's been brought up in the African-American community of what African-Americans have to do with going from the white-dominated workforce to going back to their families. Going back and forth between two worlds. That's essentially what I was doing. Now, President Obama was the one that was most well known for being able to do this effectively, where he could go in and talk to the Queen of England in one moment of time at the Olympics, and then walk into the USA Olympic basketball team locker room and talk to them on the same level that they're talking and motivate them to go out and win for gold. Now, to be able to switch back and forth between those worlds, that's pretty traumatic. But a lot of guys and women have figured that out to the point where they become very successful in their personal lives. That's essentially the same thing that soldiers are doing. And that right there is what I think causes the most trauma with soldiers, especially in my case. It wasn't necessarily the death. Like, I hate to say it, man, but at a certain point, death just becomes a reality. And it's something that you have to deal with every day. Having 19 pieces of shrapnel taken out of your body, you just got to kind of expect it. It makes it easier to deal with. But coming back and forth between those worlds, and then all of a sudden, like mine being cut off where I thought I was going to do 40 years in the military, and all of a sudden it's done. That ability to go back and forth, how African Americans have been able to figure out how to make it work for them, I think has some lessons learned, and how soldiers could deal with their real source of trauma, which is going back and forth between those two different worlds that we live in and that we're expected, which, oh, by the way, my generation, our generation, first all volunteer force to ever fight in an American war. And oh, by the way, the longest American war. So with me, what was the problem? So I realized alcohol wasn't the problem. It was a Band-Aid. It was a solution. PTSD was part of the problem, but it wasn't the actual problem. So when I got to that Wyoming place for 90 days where the Olympic U.S. ski and snowboard team pulled me out of for a couple of days to help out with Lindsey Vaughn, what I realized while I was there was that if alcohol is not my problem, PTSD is not my problem, something is that I need to figure out what it is. Because if I can't identify what the problem is, I'm just going to be spinning my wheels and continue to go back to my past behaviors in order to just survive. So as I sat there, when you go up to this program, they have you do something called cognitive processing therapy, CPT. And what the purpose of that therapy is to identify the thoughts that lead you to the emotions that lead you to do stupid stuff, right? Because if you can eliminate the thoughts, then you don't even get to the emotions and you don't do the stupid stuff, and then everybody gets along and we don't have to worry about vets going out to get DUIs or kill themselves. So at first I was like, this sounds stupid and it sounds too touchy-feely for me. But I'm here, so I'll go ahead and try.
Who would have thought you had that response?
Yeah. So when you go there, you're supposed to identify what is your most destructive thought that you have before you even come in. You're only there to work on one thought for 90 days. And the idea is if you can do that with one thought, you can do it with all of your other thoughts. So for me, when I went in, they all assume my most destructive thought would be that like losing the 9 guys in one day, or losing Ben Saban the way that I lost him, or one other specific instance that I can't talk about on air or unrecorded instance. So But instead, I went in there and I said, you know what? What if my most destructive thought is that I am damaged and flawed beyond repair because of my military service? Like, all the things that made me successful or attracted to the civilian world are actually what has led me to this place that I'm at right now. So my service essentially is what's killing me. And I realized that is honestly my most destructive thought that I have right now. And so I remember telling the therapist this, and the reason why I went there is this is where the one Ranger qualified PhD therapist in the entire VA is hiding. Sorry, Kevin. So that was why I went there, fought to go there, was to be able to work with him. And I remember when I told him that, he just sat there and shook his head and was like, wow, I would have thought it would have been one of the 38 instances of major trauma that are listed in your medical records. And I said, no, I think that one's probably it. So as I go through it, so when you go through that process, you're supposed to realize, or you're supposed to have one thought and then you come out with a different thought and you attach all the emotions and feelings to it. You go through the system, blah, 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 a bunch of hippy jibby, meditate in circles, and then you're healed because you have another thought. I'm pretty sure I'm still first person this day that did what I did. So while I was going through this process, I suddenly realized, why did I get picked to do the things that I did? Because while I was in the military, I had an opportunity to do literally everything that I ever wanted. Everything I asked for, I got an opportunity to do it. I realized, well, they didn't pick me to do the job that I was doing because I was such a nice, adorable, cuddly, like Captain America type of guy. They picked me because we were in the middle of a war and I had a capacity to be a fucking asshole like no one they had ever met. And they can continue to cultivate that while the war was going. And I got very good at it, to the point that I could lose 9 guys in one day and still come back to the fight the next day. The fact that I could have 19 pieces of shrapnel taken out of my body and come back to the fight 4 hours later. That's not normal, nor is it healthy. Yeah. But that was what worked for the war. And I can tell you this day, had the war not been going on, I would not have been promoted. I would have been probably asked to leave the military very quickly. So I suddenly realized, when I got out of the military, I was never told I had to check this capacity to be an asshole at the door. I've continued to use it, and it's continued to drive me. And now all of a sudden it's not acceptable or appropriate. And I finally realized my biggest problem is my capacity to be an asshole. Not alcohol, not PTSD, but that. And once I realized that, I said, okay, what's the only thing that can balance out a capacity to be an asshole? Develop capacity to do good. And once I started testing that out in that little VA subculture that I was in, I realized that I didn't have the desire to drink ever, and haven't since. Don't have the PTSD reactions. I still have the dreams. I still have the emotions, but I don't have the physical reactions I used to have. And I didn't need the medication suddenly. So as I went through this process, one of my favorite pieces of art, probably my only favorite piece of art, because I'm not a big art guy, is the Michelangelo statue by David, or the David statue by Michelangelo. And I don't know if you know the history behind that, but the history is that this is another one of my fluff classes that I took, the art class. So that piece of marble that was harvested, that eventually became the David statue, was supposed to be something completely different. Michelangelo personally went through the process to harvest that. And when they presented it to the emperor, they suddenly discovered a huge fault line across the piece of marble. There was no way that they could do what the emperor wanted to do. The emperor said, get rid of this, get it out of the palace. I don't even want it to be used to fill the cracks in the marble here in the palace. Michelangelo was ordered to destroy it and get rid of it. He instead hid it, and he worked around the damage and flaws of that marble, and what ended up becoming was the David statue. So arguably, the most impressive, most valuable piece of art in history was a result of something that was damaged and flawed, but allowed itself to be worked around by its creator. So I suddenly realized, well, what if I am damaged and flawed as a result of my military service, but it's because I was supposed to be? So that way my creator could work around those damage and flaws. And that creator that I choose to call Jesus and God, what if I allow him, the gospel. What if I allow him to work around those damage and flaws? So instead of it becoming my most destructive thought, it's now become a thought of hope. And that was what I left. So my new thought was, I am damaged and flawed beyond repair because of my military service, so my creator could work around this damage and flaws. And
I always say I'm broken in need of a savior, which is another way of saying exactly what you're saying.
Yep. And so that was what I found there. And since I was able to come to those recollections or come to that acknowledgement that my problem of what the actual problem was, and I'll tell you, I noticed it with myself. Like when I stopped having an attitude of service, that's when Jesse's no longer as pleasant to be around or as palatable as I might present at times. And for me, I realized that was the secret, for me at least, to survive. But then I realized that I started putting it in implementation around the Phoenix Project and around my work. I all of a sudden started doing a lot better. The people that I was working with started doing a lot better. And that is what's driven it ever since.
In the pastor word is sanctification, but I'll try to use a better, in your growth phase of knowing God, do you feel like he's cleansed your heart?
Yeah. And for me, I became I came to my faith when I was 15 years old. I was raised in the Catholic Church. That did not go well. Surprise, surprise. But I came back through my own walk when I was 15. And so my faith that I currently have now, I've had since I was 15. And it holds, that's why I say I said initially, I feel bad that the spiritual path wasn't enough to heal me or bring me back up. But I think it's definitely, the answer is yes. I mean, when people would ask me, how did you get through what you went through in Iraq? I mean, that was ultimately what I do. I would go back and, into my own prayer and acknowledge hey, I'm here for a reason. I know you got my back. We'll figure it out later. And, through that process, yeah, I definitely have had that. But that's something that I think's daily happened. It just took me a while to realize it was happening.
How did you communicate with your wife at the time? You seem like such a closed off guy. Did y'all?
No, there was no, I mean, like I said, her and I have our differences, but I've come to grow to just realize that we were not set up for success. She was not set up for success. I mean, when you get married at 20, she was a couple years older than me. So she was 23, but I was 21. We were not set up for success. Yeah. And then for me to
stick in it for so long.
I think it was because I just wouldn't quit. I refused to fail at anything. And I would just, whenever she would kind of start to get to that point where she was trying to move it forward, I would come up with some plan to fix everything. And maybe she held on to that hope or something. I don't know. We haven't really talked about it. I mean, our marriage did not end on a great note. It was a 15-month divorce process, and it's taken 5 years of healing from that, in itself. And keep in mind, that all happened about a year and a half, 2 years before I started the Phoenix Project process. So I had 2 years to sit in that crap of, how that failed. But, I can tell you that, her making the decision to finally go through it, that, has allowed me to, find the happiness that I've currently have. I mean, I used to think it wasn't possible to be happy unless you were married and had that soulmate or whatever. And to get to a point that you realize hey, you have a choice. You can set the conditions for yourself. And that's why I'm still not married. At that point. And trust me, it is something I want to do. There's nothing more in life that I want to do than have a partner, that I can be a life partner with. And I hope that it's still in the cards for me. And I believe it is, but until that happens, all I can do is set the conditions and continue to do the next right thing. And then, we'll see what happens and stay in shape.
Yeah, see, I had to read a bunch of books so that I could impress my wife with my brain knowledge. That was my plan. I was like, I'm never going to be ripped. I'll try to impress her with being good at business.
That's usually a more impressive thing. I know that's why I went out and got MBAs and masters and
yeah, you've already done it. Yeah, you're
it's a no. And there's definitely a different level that you got to go down beyond what I think we both thought. But it's and listen, man, I think a big part of it was I had so much of my own validation that was tied up in her loving me. And in her acknowledge me as husband, that when she made it clear that was over, that was traumatic, from me, that I wasn't good enough for someone. And, coming back from that process of realizing, you know what? There's nothing I could have done to change your mind. No matter what I would have done, there's nothing I could have ever done. And so, obviously, whenever I have friends that are a little bit behind, the stage in life that I'm at now, and if I have the opportunity to pour into them, I've got several friends that I mentor that are, that are your age, that are married. And when I mentor, it's from a point of like, hey, here's the mistakes I made. Here's what I'm seeing, dude. It's not. And
hey, let me just give you one. Not being home for 8 years.
yeah, like I said, she's attained a level of grace with me that I admit. I mean, 8 years of not spending more than a week together is stupid, ridiculous. Like for me, like how could we have done it? And I mean, okay, so out of us 149 guys, I believe there's one that's still married, his original wife, out of our unit. We all, our divorce rate's ridiculously high statistically.
Yeah. So we've talked about homeless rate. We've talked about what's divorce rate.
In the military overall, it's over 90%, just within the military.
Over 90%?
Yeah.
So 9 out of 10 people that join the military will not be married to the person they're married to when they leave. Or
in special operations world is higher. Guarantee it.
And is it just because you're so closed off?
That's one of, there's probably 199 different dynamics, but it all come for me. It was like, for her, she was married to a guy that was rewarded for being an asshole.
Yeah.
Promoted for it, given valorous medals. Like I didn't get my highest, my Bronze Star with Valor, which I think the Purple Heart's technically above that. Might be or might, they're right next to each other. Like you don't get that for, I've got the only picture that my daughter has, the only picture my daughters have of me in uniform is a picture of me where, and I'd love to tell you that we were doing this mission because I just wanted to get 122 high quality wheelchairs to kids that needed them in Iraq, but I wasn't. We were doing it. All right, look, it popped up in Google as the first thing. So this picture right here, this is the only picture my daughters have of me in uniform right there. Wow. Carrying that little girl, you get a wheelchair. So that day I was able to get some guy in Montana to donate like 122 $5,000 wheelchairs, but it was to go after a bad guy initially. But the results of that mission.
Wait, you privately funded this?
Yeah. Government didn't pay for a dime of those.
All right. So you met somebody in need in Baghdad.
122. So there were 122 kids like this in the area in Baghdad that I was in. They only got one wheelchair every 7 years, according to their medical system. And the wheelchairs they were getting were causing more problems.
How did you find a guy in Montana to donate $2 million?
I don't know. Wherever I went, I would always kind of make notes of everybody I met. I had met him through something we had done in training. I just reached out to him like, hey, dude, here's the situation. You got a chance to be an all-star back in the States. What do you think? And so he FedExed me over 122 of these wheels. If you go through the pictures on the website there, you'll see the wheels. They're designed for. Website? Well, this one's just off of DVids.
What do you Google to find it?
So Google my name and wheelchair, and it'll be the first thing that pops up. I think I'm the only jackass. And that picture was taken by one of my snipers from about a mile away. But that's the only. Yeah. Well, he was ready to shoot one of those guys if they went crazy. But yeah, that was from a mile away. One of my snipers took that picture.
How's it such a high quality photo?
Our scopes. It's Swarovski spotting scopes, man. They do some amazing work. But yeah, that's the only picture my daughters have in uniform. But do you know how many medals on my uniform came from this action here? None.
Yeah.
That's not what I was awarded for. That was not what made me a war hero, according to the stuff that was physically present. It was the firefights. It was the coming back from firefights after being wounded.
Yeah.
So that
and
was
what
what
she
she
was. Is that
was
system
dealing.
wrong, or is that just the system?
It's just the system. I'm not going to say whether it's wrong or not. That's you're unpacking a whole nother thing. But that's what she had to deal with. She had to deal with a guy like you're rewarded by being compassionate, by doing things, by cleaning off the counter, right? Like I was in a system that was being rewarded not for doing stuff like this. This was initially the only reason why I did this, dude, was not because I have a bleeding heart. It was to go get a target. But when I saw the results of this, because what's not in this article, the pictures on my Instagram though, was the guy that showed me that there was an EFP, explosive form projectile, which we have no armor to stop, was right outside of my vehicle that day. He went and told me it was there because I got in his kid a wheelchair. I'd have been sliced to shreds. And it was waiting for me as soon as I got back in my vehicle. But he told me it was there. Got a EOD out there. Turned out it was an EFP. And so I made him take a picture with me, and he had this like little heart picture. And so we took it and like thumbs up.
Did you ever change a diaper?
I delivered a baby.
Like your own, I'm saying your own kids.
No.
Did you ever change a diaper of your own kids?
Okay. Okay.
You were gone so much.
That's what I'm going back to think. So with Addison, I think there might have been a couple. Like when she was like 9 months old and questionable whether she actually needed the diapers anymore or not. But no, I was never home for Addison. And with Camille, I was home, but she was born right as I was finding out I was losing my career was ending. And so I was always traveling. I was still never home. So even when I say that the first 8 years wasn't home, I don't think it ever really changed, just because even my job, like with the fellowship, like I was traveling all over the world doing interviews. If you look in the back of that book, the bibliography, you'll see over 100 different interviews from people from 40 different countries. That's all I was doing. I still wasn't home. And then when I became a civilian, and honestly, man, as I look back on it, I made decisions to pursue jobs where I wouldn't be home. Because if I was home and I was stopped, that was time to think about what had happened. My high school principal or guidance counselor, I think, told me, you know what, Jesse, you are a human doer, not a human being. And at the time I took it as a compliment because I was like, at least someone's recognizing what I'm doing. But it wasn't. And that's like every day when I do my meditation, I write down my to-be list rather than a to-do list. And it's always tied to, what do I desire to be today? If I'm with my daughters, it's to be the father that they need to be. Today, when I did it, it was to be the guest that you needed me to be for the podcast. It's like when you transition from how much can I get done to how much I can be of service to other people. Well, hopefully in the end, this podcast comes out a little bit better than if I just been like, okay, you know what? He sent me an email saying, what are the things that we can help push for you and this, and make sure you list them so we can make sure you're doing with it. I'm like, okay, I need him to push this, and this, and this, and this, and this, and this. If I was more focused on that, which the list I sent you, I think was a couple things that if it's convenient to work them in, great. But like when I go towards things of focusing more on what I need to be in order to be of service to the people that I'm getting the honor to share space with, the results, I can't deny, are always exponentially better than when I go into it with what I need to accomplish. And while maybe you don't necessarily articulate that's what you're doing, I can sense just from our conversations that you are more concerned with, okay, Jesse, how can I be of service to you? How can we advocate for AM300? How can we advocate for the Phoenix Project? How can we advocate for your story? Because clearly you want to help people by telling your story. So how can we draw that out more? I can sense that from you. For me, I just realized that I needed to articulate that and I need to guide it through daily meditations, because if I don't do it, I'm human. I forget. And I go back to my de facto, which is how much can I get done? And I can mark off a list so I can say that I've done more than my competition.
Yeah.
So
I find that people don't resonate with 30-second ShamWow ads.
That's why Instagram doesn't work for me. They lock you in at 60 seconds for the dang video, or then you got to make it a second one. So yes, I agree.
I find what people resonate with is relationships. And so when you do a 3-4 hour podcast, people feel like they have a relationship with you. And once they feel they have a relationship with you, they want to be all in on you. And that's why I go the places that nobody wants to go. I spend the time nobody wants to spend, because I know that if I can get you to build a relationship with listeners, then everybody wins.
So this is only the second podcast that I've done in probably the last 12 months. And like, if you look up to 12 months prior to that, there was a lot that I did. Like anyone that would come out, like if they were starting a podcast, like, yeah, sure, I'd love to come out. And what they'd always say though, it's like, I only have 60 minutes. And I'm like, okay, I'm here to serve you. And so if that's all that you want to do, then we'll cap it at 60 minutes. And I will put my calendar 60 minutes. But the podcasts that I can say were the most special for me were the ones where maybe that's what they did, but fortunately my calendar allowed to be able to, extend, or they just said, hey, we're not going to put a timeline on it. We'll cut it down to 60 minutes and say, all right, great. But every time they put it out in 3 or 4 episodes or whatever. So when you came and you said, hey, honestly, the name, I was like, because I'm a big fan of Alice in Wonderland, and my whole life has basically been that in terms of going down the rabbit hole. And so the fact that that's the intention that you go in with it, that was something that kind of spread. That was why this is only the second one that I've done.
This week, a lady replied back, like, hey, I'm down to do it, but I can only do 1 hour. And I said, sorry. That's like, Hannah goes, is that okay? I go, nope, that's not what we do. Like, because the thing is that, and this is stolen directly from Joe Rogan, but anybody can bullshit for an hour. Anybody can pretend to be something for an hour. But at 3 hours, they're either going to be who they are, or sweating bullets, right? Like at 3 hours, you can only hold the persona up for so long.
Yeah. So there was one person I wished I could have brought with me here today. In fact, he's the one that's been calling me this entire time because he thought the podcast was on Tuesday. His name's Richard Bell, and he's my COO of AM300. His son and I know his son is going to sit there and roll when he hears this, but he's still to this day the only man that I've spooned with naked. He was in Ranger School. We went through Ranger School together. And so Richard and I became really good friends. So Richard's his father. And when I started going through the divorce process, Ryan was the only one that I reached out to, Richard's son. He's currently battalion commander in the 82nd Airborne Division right now, doing great things. And I told him, hey, man, here's what's going on, just giving you a heads up. And he couldn't be there for me. And he wanted to. And so he sent his dad up during that first couple weeks. And Richard and I have been best friends ever since. So Richard is he's a leader of, in fact, if you come out to Brookhaven with me, we'll probably go play with a couple of the men in his golf team. It's called the Rat Bastards. No kidding. The Rat Bastard golf team. And that guy is the one that I kind of put in the position that he was a catalyst for the Phoenix Project being able to happen in the first place. Because had he not been there, that was like the one emotional attachment that I actually had. So he lives here in Dallas, and that's why I came down here, was to stay with him when I was finishing that book up. And man, you'd enjoy just talking with him. I don't know about the podcast because he's
is he free for dinner tonight?
I don't know. Well, he's only like 10 minutes away.
Okay,
so
yeah, just get him on. We'll
give
figure it out.
But that's his whole thing is, stop, leave expectations at the door. And, it's amazing what can happen when you do that. And there are times where you got to put 60 minutes on something. You can only give someone 30 minutes. But what you're talking about is you're talking about investing in people. Right? Because something tells me you're not the type of person that if you do a podcast and you invest 3 hours of your life, it's not kind of like, okay, here's a video from it. Here's a branding set that we did for you. Now don't ever call me again. It's like, you're doing this to invest in relationships. And that's not the norm of what people want to do. And that's different. That's the dark horse taking a different path. And I mean, when I talk about this dark horse thing, I'm sure you're probably in your back of your mind kind of like, yeah, it's what I've been doing my entire life. I mean, you talk about how you didn't go to college. It's like, I mean, that's not easy for a 27-year-old guy to talk to a 41-year-old guy. When I say, hey man, where'd you go to school after I've just told you, laid down. Well, no, I'm saying it's for most people because it's like, it is what it is. Right. But you're like, no, this is what I did. And you owned it and I respected it.
Yeah.
Because obviously you're someone that, invests in relationships. If that relationship required going to the University of Tennessee, then you'd have to just settle with being an SEC person for the rest of your life, but you don't. So,
I mean, they're a division that wins.
Yeah.
Say what you want, but
I know the Pac-12 is going to fall off with California with the rest of the country.
So this is your first book.
Yep.
What did you learn in writing it?
Oh, I learned that I could finish something that I wanted to commit mental suicide every single day while I was working on it, because that was, tough. It was doing research. It was digging into things. It was finding answers that had I had in 2007, maybe not as many guys would have died, because the stuff that I found while researching that book was lessons learned that I could have used in 2006 and 7 and would have probably, or used in 2003 for crying out loud, and avoided 2006 and 7 from ever happening in the first place. But all the information that's in that book was thrown away with the rest of the Vietnam War because everyone wanted to pretend that it didn't happen. And the reason why I published it now was I was seeing the same thing happening with COVID, where people were just like, how can we just get this over, to forget about it and flush it and never talk about it ever again? And instead of finding the lessons that are hidden in the ashes of defeat, which is what COVID has been, I mean, it has been a defeat, but rather than just pretend it never happened, what can we learn from it? And what can we take to make sure some of this stuff never happens ever again?
So that's what you learned. What does the reader learn?
Well, the reader will learn about, the history of special operations. At least the Ranger Regiment wasn't established in the late 70s. So it was a precursor to that. And it was special forces in the Vietnam War when they were established. And so the lens that I used to talk about Un-Winnable Wars was the predecessors to the Rangers, which was the special forces groups that were in Vietnam. So what it does is it follows what was arguably the most successful counterinsurgency mission in history that no one ever knew about. And the premise of it is to show the importance of not dumping the baby out with the bathwater. But that's what I'm hoping that the reader gets out of it in the end, is that the importance of not letting the lessons go. Because I think that's why we ended up in the place that we're in with COVID, was all the hard-fought wisdom to get through COVID was already laid out for us by a previous generation, by current generation, previous generations. And instead, we just sat around all feeling sorry for ourselves. And that's a hasty generalization, obviously. But, for the most part.
Not me.
I got it. Like I said, man, COVID was actually pretty good to me. Other than, one failed romantic relationship, I would call it an overall win that COVID, she chose to take, the easy way out with that. But, it was good to me.
My wife and I, we met during the biggest win of my whole life. I started Rabbit. It launched and it was instantly successful. And in business, my experience, people that have brands, it's different for them most of the time. But like, you launch something and it exists and nobody cares. And then you spend the next 5-10 years just hammer it down people's throats until people care, and it grows over time. With Rabbit, we go live, black bots, orange things in it, plastic sign on top. Random people start walking up to it and using it, downloading it, just completely random people. And so I'm like experiencing a high. Everybody wants to invest in us. Everybody, it's just everything's great. And I had said that I was going to marry her, I think on like our third date, because I did.
It's cocky. I like it.
Because I'd gone on dates with like probably 100 plus people, and I just knew, I was like, yeah, this is the one. And I don't believe there's any certain one, but I knew I could build a life with this person. But I was always hesitant to put a ring on, because I was like, I'm only experiencing, everything is perfect right now. Like, because business, which my identity has been tied to, because it's the only thing that I was able to self-do my whole life, is being successful. And so then when we came out of when we went into the pandemic and came out of the pandemic, just still awesome. I was like, yep, this is it.
So when did you guys get married?
We got married in January of this year, and we got engaged in January of this year too. So we got engaged New Year's Day of 2021, and then legally got married like the next day.
Congratulations.
Within the next couple of days.
I'll keep it in the calendar.
But we say our anniversary is the day of our first date. That's what we do our anniversary off of. So when I say we celebrate our anniversary, you totally didn't, but that's the one that matters, because it's like we just knew very soon after that. Not on the first date. Maybe she knew on the first day. I didn't know on the first date. All right. So anyway, first book, second book that hasn't come out yet. Tell me about it.
Yep. So that's the Phoenix Project, and that's what we've been talking about. So it is a story of how I got here. So it's the origin story, and it's still going through the edits of what we're going to keep in there, because some of the stuff is.
Do I get to read an advanced copy?
Oh, yeah, we'll give you an advanced copy. You've gotten a little bit of an advanced copy here today, but no, it's the entire story, and some of it is tough, tough to read. And some of it is stuff that I don't know if I necessarily want my daughters reading. My daughters, so they didn't know that I did on TED Talk until my oldest daughter watched it, I believe, in her school class. Like it came up randomly in their school class. Yeah. And so, I did the TED Talk almost 3 years ago. So they'd never known about it. I've never talked about it with them. They know what TED Talks are. They watch them all the time in school. But I just never really brought it up because I talk about some tough stuff in there. And then my daughter was just like, oh my gosh, you did a TED Talk, Dad? I'm like, yeah. She's like, that's like a big deal. I'm like, okay, you finally think I'm cool now or what, And so, but watching, and I watched them. So Millie hadn't seen it, my youngest daughter. And so my oldest daughter watched it again with her. And I've actually never seen the talk. I took Brene Brown's advice of not watching it and don't read the reviews. I have someone else that does that for me and filters through the actuals. I was there. I know what I did right. I know what I did wrong. And, it is what it is. But, to watch my daughters kind of take that in and understand the level of pain that their father went through. And for them to now understand, okay, there's a reason why Daddy was the way that he was up until 4 years ago, and to be able to talk to him about that. And more importantly, my youngest daughter, Camille, actually lost one of her best friends earlier this year. I don't know if you saw it on the news, but there was sadly a mother that turned on and killed her daughter and son back in Chandler about 2.5 months ago. And that was one of my daughter's best friends. And so to be able to immediately reflect back and talk about the Phoenix Project and how Daddy went through his loss, was empowering, because I was like, holy crap, now I know why all this stuff was meant to happen. And there's been times where I've wondered, like, how am I going to share this legacy with the girls? And, the whole reason for codifying it and establishing a business structure was in the event that they wanted to be more a part of it. They could, later down the road. Like, man, I'm lucky. I wake up every day and I get a retirement check from the United States government at full pay of a major, which is not bad. And I never have to lift another finger. I could play golf and for the rest of my life. But that's not what gives me purpose. And I hope that if the girls want to follow in that, they at least have the opportunity. So the second book, The Phoenix Project, Hard Fought Wisdom for Winning in Life, is the story leading up. What I leave out of it is the application. So it's kind of like theory first, then application. And so with Baylor, my dissertation will be kind of more focused on the application side of it. So, and hopefully have another book in the queue ready.
When you do a book tour, if there's ever an opportunity for there to be an MC that asks you questions about the book.
Dude, that's what sucked about this coming out.
I want to be the guy.
Well, that's what sucked about the Un-Winnable Wars coming out. Like, it did well, and I was shocked because the publisher, the only reason why they supported publishing this was because they wanted to do a test of how I'd be received into the market for the Phoenix Project. And it ended up doing all right in the book sales. But that was without being able to do that because I couldn't do a book tour. And we pushed it back and pushed it back. So because Jordan Peterson's book tour, which sold out stadiums, so it was a little different than the average book tour. But, why not, dude? Let's go big. Go big or go home, right?
He brought whatever that political guy's name is, I forgot, on the tour with him that essentially did like a Q&A with him on stage every night.
Yep.
So if you ever need that guy, I want to be that guy.
I'd be down with it, man. We'll figure something out because I do intend, this was kind of a quiet test that ended up doing a lot better than the publisher I thought it would do. And so, we can definitely talk about stuff for when the release is. We're hoping the end of this year for publication. So, and if not the end of this year, early next year. But a lot of it is driven off of, what the heck are they going to let us do at this point? Because that one I definitely did not want to release under COVID restrictions.
So we need to wrap up. You're hungry. You're antsy. You're moving a lot. I am too.
This is a long time to be sitting in one space. I hope you appreciate the significance of this accomplishment.
I do.
Just kidding.
I can't. That's why I don't watch movies. I can't sit still for that long. Or hold my attention that long. Maybe that's it. Something that's so wonderful about Can't Hurt Me was the audiobook version of it. And you're so good on the mic that I just want to give you the deepest encouragement to do the audio version of it.
I'm not.
Read it yourself.
I'm not.
And do a version, like a podcast version, like Goggins did.
Yeah, so we are doing that. So the book is going to be read by Richard Bell.
Okay.
He's reading the audiobook, and the cover has already been approved. So can't deviate from that. We are. So the plan is he's going to read, and at the end of each chapter, he's going to be like, Jesse, what was actually happening here, or whatever. So that is the plan. So I will be in it to answer the questions, like similar to that. But, and the reason for that is, and the publisher initially was like, no, do not like this. Like, you need to read it. Blah, blah. Like, we already canceled the talent that was scheduled for it. And I said, that's all right, because I got someone better. The only guy that I will admit hands down is more interesting than myself is Richard Bell. Like, that guy, and he has a way of telling my story. So after we're done, I'll show you an interesting picture of about Bradley Cooper. But the Hangover 4, 5, and 6, I've literally experienced with that guy. Hangover 4 was in New York City. Still don't remember what actually happened. His version of it is entertaining enough. Hangover 5 was in Alabama, and Hangover 6 was here in Dallas. So, like, that guy, he has a way of helping to tell my story. I mean, before I met him, like, I literally we'd not be having this conversation. So that's already been decided. I appreciate the compliment, and man, but the one thing I always remind myself, this book isn't my story. This book is the story of those 14 Rangers that died in 06, 07, and the countless others that unfortunately is way more than 14 now, that have died since. And I should not have walked away from that 2003 vehicle incident where the Humvee went in the trench. I should not have walked away from that suicide bomber. There was a helicopter incident that happened, and there was a bullet incident that happened in addition to the two things that we talked about. Should not have walked away from those, and somehow I did. And not saying that I was saved
Lord really wants you on this earth.
Not going to say that. I'm just saying that I'm here, and I know that I shouldn't be. And so, man, when I wake up every morning, it is a realization that, I'm getting an opportunity to be here. The stuff that I've had the opportunity to do, it's not my success, it's theirs. And, my publisher doesn't like how I necessarily talk about that type of stuff, but, it is what it is. And, listen, man, I've got one purpose on this earth, and it's to be of service. And I'm not cuddly about talking about that. Sometimes my service work or my taking care of people is tough love, and they don't necessarily like it. But it's done with the intention of being of service, because I know I shouldn't be here. And all 14 of those guys, I'll tell you, were better men than I am. And I would have recommended to be on your podcast before me ever. And they just don't have a chance to tell their story.
Jesse Stewart, thanks for coming on.
My pleasure, brother. Rangers lead the way.